Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the board meeting for the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service. We are recording so that we can ensure public access to this meeting, and we have got no planned disruptions. We will be taking some regular breaks through the day just to make sure that we can attend to our comfort needs. And we have, after this meeting, a private meeting of the board also. That all said, I think we can move into the first part of our meeting, and we can begin with any apologies. So I've got some apologies from Liz Burns, Director of People and Organisational Development, who's got jury service in fact and is going to be substituted with Scott Semple. He's only going to be attending in the private part of the meeting, but it's worth recording that in advance. Now that we've done that, I don't think there are any, there's one, so items, we're going to consider items to be taken in private. It's just to note that the Chief's report, his initial report this morning, Chief Officer's report, is going to be taken in private because there are a number of areas of commercial in confidence and other sensitive areas that he can't do in public. So we're just going to move that into the private session. If anything emerges during the meeting that feels like we need to be taking it in private, then we can do so. Did anybody spot anything else on the agenda that's problematic, or are we content with the agenda as it stands? Content? Good stuff. And can I ask if anybody has any declarations of interest that they need to make on any item on the agenda? No. If anything emerges during the meeting, please just indicate and we can manage that and address it as we go. That takes us into the minutes of our previous meeting, and we have the minutes from the 29th of April and also the special board minutes, which were the 27th of May. Can we take the 29th of April minutes first for any proposed amendments before we decide whether or not we are willing to agree them? So if we're happy to scan through, I'm not going to say page by page, but please identify if there are any issues on what page, if we need to make any corrections. No. In that case, are we content to approve these as an accurate record of the meeting? No, lovely, thank you very much. Can we now look at the minutes of the 27th of May, please? And the same again for any issues of accuracy, any amendments that need to be made. Leslie, I can see your hands up.
Thanks, Chair. Leslie Bloomer, board member. Paragraph 5.7, this was in relation to PIs. We've got in relation to accidental dwelling fire fatalities PI, ref 1.6. I think it should be accidental dwelling fire casualties, ref 1.8.
Yes, that would make sense, that it's accidental fire casualties. Are we content to amend the minutes to reflect that? Lovely, thank you. On that basis that we've amended those, are we content now to record those as and approve those as accurate? Lovely, thank you. That takes us into the action log, and Ali Cameron's going to take us through those. Thank you, Ali.
Thank you, Chair. So just to confirm that the board are content with the summary action log, we've got 5 actions in total, 4 of which are marked as green, and with the position statements as detailed, and 1 of which marked as blue completed. So just to confirm the board are content for that one to be removed and for the other actions to remain as they are just now. Thank you, Chair.
Content on that basis to approve the closed actions? Lovely, thank you. And Ali, with you still with the decision log.
Thank you, Chair. So again, just to confirm, the board are content with the decisions as noted on the decision log itself, and also just to highlight that following internal audit's recommendation, there's been individual impact assessment sections now added to the action log itself from April 21 onwards, and this will be reflected upon after 12 months to see the impact of those decisions that have been made by the board at that time. Thank you, Chair.
Content to note Lovely. Thank you very much. That takes us into the Chair's report, my own report, and I've tabled a note of my diary as always. That's there for questions. The only thing that I would choose to flag is the fact that we've had a number of meetings with the National Joint Council, both as 4 nations and as employers, and then with the employee side. And this was the first time that Fiona, as the Deputy Chair, has also attended a number of these meetings alongside the Chief Officer. The offer has been made by the NJC of 1.5% to firefighters as a pay settlement from July. The FBU are consulting on that, but the general feedback that they've been giving to their members is that they should accept that offer. So that's just to inform you that that is the case. We've also had other informal meetings with the NJC about wider industrial relations at a UK-wide level. So it's to make you aware that that has been happening, and we continue to work with them around UK-wide employee relations aspects. Having said that, I'm just going to hesitate in case anybody has any questions specifically on my activity or on anything that I've said so far. Tim.
Thank you, Chair. Tim Wright, member of the board. Thanks, Chair. Do you have any sense of when we might get a formal decision from the FBU on that? So it's if they're making recommendation, when are they likely to be able to move towards formally saying whether they will or not accept it?
So I believe they're consulting just now. I don't actually know what their time scale is on that, and I don't think they've actually announced one. At some point they will make a decision about how they're going to come to an agreement, but at the moment it appears that they're consulting. It doesn't come into place until the 1st of July, but the intention had been that the employer side should make the offer before that, and it was made well in advance of that. But I don't have an idea yet about how long it might take them to accept.
Thanks, Chair.
Bill.
Thanks, Kirsty. The 19th of May, you had a meeting with our old friend Gillian Russell at Scottish Government, who's moved over to look at health workforce. What's the context for that? Are they just exchanging pleasantries? Or are we looking at something that might be relevant on the health side and the fire side coming together? Thanks.
It wasn't anything to do with working together so much as sharing good practice around working with good practice around industrial relations was really the conversation we were having. It was about the challenges across the public sector with terms and conditions and making changes and how to best approach that. So it was myself and Gillian and some of her colleagues just thinking about how as Scotland we might be able to move forward, particularly in a post-COVID environment when all of our roles inevitably may need to be somewhat different.
Thanks. And they, of course, do shift work across the NHS. Is there anything relevant or might be relevant for us in thinking about how we amend our shift work practices or scheduling at some point? Thanks.
I think that's a very early stage of their thinking about what they might want in the NHS moving forward. As you know, Gillian, it's workforce planning. So it's at that hypothetical concept stage rather than anything practical at the moment, I believe.
Thank you.
Anything else? Nope. Okay. That said then, we are on to the next item on the agenda, and that is the Deputy Chief Officer's Change Portfolio Update. Oh, Malcolm, I can see your hand's just gone up. Oh, you're still on mute, Malcolm.
Sorry, once again. No, it was just a minor technical point. You said we would take the Chief's report in private. I just wanted to check the written report that lists the activities. Is that then private, or does that written report remain public?
No, the written report can remain public because it's important that people are publicly aware of the activity, and the board are aware of
that
the
was the case. I just wanted that minuted and clarified. Yeah. Thank you.
No, it's just some areas of sensitivity in the content. Thank you, Malcolm. Yes, Ross Haggart, please, Deputy Chief Officer's report. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair, and good morning, colleagues. As the Chair's stated, I'm Ross Haggart, Deputy Chief Officer. Colleagues will recall that at the last meeting on the 29th of April, I gave more of a focused update on individual programmes and projects that are ongoing within the change portfolio. So because I gave that more in-depth update, I would propose that I just give a more strategic overview of where we are going with the change portfolio today, and the detail will be provided at the Change Committee meeting on the 5th of August when we meet anyway. The main thing that I'm going to talk about is, as you're aware, Andy Main took up post as Head of Portfolio Office on the 26th of April. So he's been with the organisation for just coming up for 2 months now. Since then, Andy's been appraising where we are as an organisation in terms of the change portfolio, both in terms of the team that supports it directly within the portfolio office and also how the organisation is set up to deliver significant change anyway. Andy's taken into account, firstly and most importantly, because he's been employed for his professional skills and experience, his own observations, and his own observations have been informed by primarily attending meetings, principally the Senior Management Board, where the change portfolio is considered, and he's also had individual discussions with key stakeholders within the organisation, including his own team, SLT and SMB colleagues, and he's also met with Fiona as the chair of the Change Committee as well to inform his observations. He's also taken into account the findings of the Gateway Review that was undertaken on the portfolio back in February of last year, and also the strategic review that was undertaken late last year. So he's taken all of those elements into account in terms of appraising where we currently are at the moment. To date, he's presented his findings to both SLT and SMB, and he will also be presenting his findings to a workshop of the Change Committee on the 20th of July. And while committee members will obviously come to their own conclusions regarding Andy's observations, certainly at both SLT and SMB, we've been extremely impressed by the quality and the perception of Andy's observations, given the very short space of time he's been with the organisation. Following the workshop with the Change Committee and taking on board the committee's views, Andy will be developing a development portfolio function roadmap, which he will then lead with his team to enact throughout 2021-22 and determine the actions that he needs to take in order to bolster his own team and also the organisation's change capability and capacity going forward. As part of that, I'm also reviewing how we conduct business through the Senior Management Board. The business has largely remained the same since I've been in this role, and I'm really keen to be guided by Andy to ensure that how we manage that business is improved where we can. I will, however, I would assure you, I will do so in taking full cognizance and account of how this complements the work that the Change Committee undertakes, so I can make sure that there's a streamlined approach in terms of the overseeing of the work through the Senior Management Board and thereafter the scrutiny role that the Change Committee plays. And I think the workshop in July will be a really key moment in terms of determining together how that looks going forward. I know that the Chief Officer will probably cover some of the key projects within his update in the private session, so as I've already said, I won't go into those. The only thing that I will raise, however, because it's really also part of our improvement journey, is we have recently concluded an evaluation on the previous 5-watch duty system project that was undertaken some time ago within the organisation, and as members will know, this is on the back of undertaking evaluations of the Rapid Response Unit and Rural Full-Time Post projects as well. So we've now got a combined action plan that's taken some really rich learning from the 3 of these evaluation reports. That action plan was presented to the Senior Management Board last week and endorsed at the Senior Management Board, and will go forward to the Change Committee on the 5th of August for them to scrutinise. And also, as part of the key work that Andy and the team will be taking forward, is the enacting of the lessons that we have identified and making sure those lessons are fully embedded within the organisation. Most of the lessons impact directly on the portfolio office, so it's clearly within Andy's gift to take those forward, but there are some other recommendations that rest with other parts of the organisation, which Andy will coordinate, and will ensure that is undertaken through the Senior Management Board in an appropriate phased manner. That's really all I wanted to provide by way of an update, trying to keep it at a more strategic level for board colleagues, but I'm happy to take any questions on anything that I've covered, or indeed anything else that you would like to ask me on in terms of the change portfolio.
Brian.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Brian Baverstock, board member. Thanks, Ross, for that. I have a number of questions, but I'll contain myself and raise them at the workshop on the 20th of July. Just to clarify, with Andy's arrival, is that the team up to kind of capability and capacity now, or are we still filling gaps?
Yeah, thanks for that, Brian. It's a really good question. We made a conscious decision that the key to taking forward the portfolio office was getting a head of function in place who could then properly appraise where we were. That's not to say that we hadn't given consideration to what potential structures could look like within the portfolio office, and indeed, led by Paul Stewart, there was some notional structures pulled together. The SLT tacitly approved, but not to go and fill, more just to recognise that there was a need to bolster structures in that area, and the direction of travel that Paul was leading was absolutely supported. Now that Andy's come in, one of the things that he has done is he's undertaken a gap analysis in terms of where there are key gaps and capabilities within his team and across the organisation, and has started to form some thoughts regarding key roles. What's really encouraging is that he's very focused, and it doesn't appear that there's going to be a huge number of additional roles that need to be filled. However, there are probably 3 or 4 key roles that Andy's identified, and we've actually started recruitment round about one of those roles at the moment. So yes is the answer. There are some gaps in terms of capabilities that have been identified, but we don't think that those gaps in terms of the numbers of people we need to bring in to plug them are particularly large. So I'm very confident that SLT will be able to support the filling of those relevant roles.
That's great, Ross, and it seems that measured approach is absolutely the right way to proceed.
Thank you, Ross. Any other further questions at all? No. Lovely, thank you. That takes us into our committee reports and the Audit and Risk Assurance Committee, and that's with you, Brian.
Yeah, thanks, Kirsty. I gave the account of the previous Audit and Risk Committee at our April meetings, so I have nothing to add to that. Our next meeting is on the 8th of July, but happy, as always, to take any forward-facing questions.
No, thank you, Brian. Change Committee, Fiona.
Thanks, Chair. Fiona Thorburn, board member. The minutes are there, and as ever from the last meeting on the 6th of May, there were 2 key things to mention. The first is to reiterate a lot of what Ross has just said in terms of Andy Main coming on board and the quality and depth of his experience and his observations to date. In my opinion, he's going to be a very valuable member of the organisation. And as Ross said, we've got the workshop on the 20th of July where we'll look at the portfolio office and in general our change management roadmap in a lot more detail. So looking forward to that. The other thing I wanted to mention was command and control futures. Clearly a very, very big ticket project for us, both in terms of its business criticality and cost, and feels timely for the board to again get a bit more of an in-depth update on where we're at with command and control futures. So that's coming to Board Strategy Day on the 29th of July. And that's it. Happy as ever to take any questions. Thanks.
Anything for Fiona? No. Okay, thank you. Primrose, People Committee.
Thank you, Chair. Primrose Stark, Chair of the People Committee. Again, the minutes are there for members to look through. I'll pick out a couple of items just to bring to people's attention, pick out some highlights. Very pleasing to look at our 2021 Equal Pay and Gender Pay Gap report, which demonstrates the positive progress that's been made by the service, with a very favourable comparison, not only with the UK national average, but importantly with our inherited antecedent services. So great progress made on that. In respect of health and wellbeing, there's been a tremendous amount of work done during this very challenging year, but we have to address the significant backlog, and business cases have been approved in that regard. An employee wellbeing survey was launched in Q4 with the results being shared and informed, and there's an action plan to support that. I guess the understandable themes were concerns around returning to the workplace, work-life balance and flexible working options, and there are action plans in place to support all of that too. Our People Training, Finance and Assets Systems programme is continuing, but meantime there's a new contract in place for the next 30 months to ensure that we have stability until the new system is live. We discussed one of the themes that's recurring about the low percentage of exit interviews carried out, and this is currently being reviewed to improve the uptake. With regard to training, I'm pleased to note the use of innovation that's enabled delivery of training to continue during this year, with new methods allowing competency assessments and courses to be undertaken remotely. And it's interesting to note the different methods and models of delivery. A good example of this that you'll see in the minutes is specialist training. Training is now scheduled to take place immediately before an 18-day rota, which enables individuals from different watches to attend. So it's good use of resources, planning and time. We mentioned a couple of main risks to note for the board, and this is again a recurring theme about capacity of resources to deliver training and capacity of facilities in general due to our social distancing. This is very much the focus of the organisation, with action plans in place to look at those as well, and very much discussed with the SLT. We had an update on the response to HMFSI audit, which is there for you to see. In terms of health safety insurance, I'm pleased to report that there's continued progress on our health and safety improvement plans, which is great to see. Downward trends, which again, we're very pleased at. You'll see in the papers later on in the meeting, we have our health and safety policy statements and our annual reports, which were taken at the committee. And we discussed our annual value added statement. And really, I think all of the other items are within the minutes. But can I just perhaps raise that we have had a very challenging year within the service, and we acknowledge through the People Committee the support given by POD and Training, Safety Insurance Directorate to support the organisation with all the people policies and issues that have occurred during the year. And just to note that with our thanks to the board.
Absolutely. I'm very pleased to reiterate that. Any questions for Primrose? Thank you for that, Primrose. Service Delivery Committee, Nick.
Morning, good morning, colleagues. Nick Barr, board member and chair of the Service Delivery Committee. You've got a copy of the minutes. I, like Primrose, will just give a brief overview of a few important items. Our service delivery update report was its usual excellent format. The main topics are listed within the minutes. One thing we did ask for was an update at the next meeting on the existing OC equipment and its durability as we're working towards this the new CCMS. We were joined when we looked at our Q4 performance. We're going to cover this under item 17 of this meeting, so I won't duplicate this, but we were joined by the data team leader, Gregor Welsh. That adds a really good dimension to the conversations there. And we had some interesting discussions around that. We did comment positively on the high standard of the data presented in the report, and it seems to get better with each report, so that was excellent. Thank you. Thank you to the team for doing that. We looked at 4 HMFS action reports. I'll just remind colleagues of the 4 that we're looking at the moment: the fire safety enforcement, the national recommendations arising from the local area inspections. At the moment, they're concentrating around Dumfries and Galloway and Edinburgh, management of fleet and equipment, and the provision of ORI. We looked at each one in turn, and we were content with the assurances given on all these. There was just a gentle reminder from us really to be focused on the actual recommendations rather than additional items which may come on in the course of addressing those actions. That seemed to also reflect comments previously made by the SLT. We then looked at the UFAS work, excellent work. Roy Dunside joined us for this. Obviously, we're going to talk about this at length further on in our meeting now. Just to add, really, the committee were very impressed by the thorough and the comprehensive nature of the work to date. So thank you yet again. Clinical governance, we're going to be looking at that next one when the Scottish Ambulance Service have conducted their review. The Grenfell Tower update report will be covered by Stuart just in a moment. And we also looked at the service delivery risks. And as part of the process for that, we also had a live demonstration of the in-phase risk reporting module. So that worked well as well. Our risk spotlight was on fire safety enforcement and the impact that COVID has had on this work, including the change in the delivery model of that. Subsequent discussions, a discussion within the meeting and then subsequently following that meeting led Stuart and I to agree to have an hour put aside after the next meeting, or at the end of the next meeting, to go back to basics presentation on fire safety enforcement in order to bring committee members and any other board members who wish to join us, new and old, fully up to speed with the legal framework and the recent developments in this field. You're all welcome to join that if you see fit. We then looked at the response and resilience review and internal restructure. David Farris joined us for this, and he took us through his work, and that was an excellent presentation. Thank you, David, for that. The details of that are in the meeting, in the minutes. In terms of future topics, we'll be looking at the operational strategy at the next meeting, as well as fire safety enforcement and the outcomes of the Scottish Ambulance Service review on clinical governance. So just before I hand over to Stuart to cover off the the Grenfell Tower fire update report, any questions for me on that? No? Okay. Stuart.
Thank you, Nick. Good morning, colleagues. Assistant Chief Officer Stuart Stevens. I'm the Director of Service Delivery. So at the Service Delivery Committee, I provided the latest update on the Grenfell Action Plan, which was update number 7. Updated the committee that there have been a number of personnel changes to the working group, which includes a new chair, which is now the Head of Prevention and Protection, Daco Ali Perry. These changes, allied with the reduced demand of COVID workloads, have allowed for a detailed stocktake on the progress of the action plan, as well as the ability to clearly set out the route to completion for the remaining actions. That's not to say that work hadn't been progressing, but clearly we've been faced with a number of challenges over the last year, and this has made progress challenging in some specific areas, mainly those that relate to practical testing and exercising, and those that involve access to the control rooms. I provided the Service Delivery Committee with a detailed action plan and the current RAG status of each action. There were also detailed position updates provided against each specific recommendation, and where those recommendations remained open, we have set out the specific actions which are in train, which will complete each of those recommendations. I would highlight to committee members that, or board members, that in several cases the service had already met the intent of the original recommendation, and however, and this is something that I don't generally advocate, but we've chosen to go beyond a number of those recommendations with some actions that the service is undertaking. And in those cases, those actions won't be closed off until those additional actions have subsequently been completed. I was pleased to report to the Service Delivery Committee that we've completed a further 6 actions in that reporting period, and those were recommended for closure. Whilst that's very positive, there are, however, 13 actions that require timescale review, and we've proposed to extend these from June to September of this year. I would remind board members that the initial completion dates for the recommendations were self-determined by the service, and they were also made prior to the emergence of the COVID pandemic. The need to review those as purely as a result of the COVID pandemic, which, as you'll be aware, has diverted staff, and this, along with prolonged periods of government set restrictions, has curtailed our ability to carry out large-scale testing and exercising, as I said earlier. However, I'm pleased to say that these are now underway or planned over the coming months. I was also pleased to report that we've successfully undertaken a fire survival guidance exercise, and that involves testing the process to communicate electronically the details of those occupiers being provided fire survival guidance from control direct to the command units on scene. So following successful testing of this, that learning has now been consolidated, and preparations are underway to roll this out nationally. And we'll use the task card process that has worked and served us really well through the COVID period. The completion of that milestone is really important because that represents our ability to unlock a number of interdependent recommendations. There was one recommendation that I've asked to be transferred to the CCMS project, and that relates to access to our command and control systems by our blue light partners. That's something that will not be completed in the short term, hence why it's been moved to the CCMS project. Lastly, I'll just highlight that the HMI has set out its intent to carry out a thematic audit of high-rise firefighting and our response to the Grenfell tragedy. This is now commenced, and I have my session of the HMI programme for the 7th of July. So in terms of summary, there are 44 actions in total on the action plan. 26 have now been complete and 17 remain outstanding, but will be on track for completion by September of this year. And that's me. Thank you.
Lovely, thank you for that update, Stuart. If there are no further questions on that or the previous report, that takes us into the board member appointment and review of committee structure. And Mark, please.
Thank you, Kirsty. Mark McAteer, Director of Strategic Planning, Performance and Communications. A very short report, Kirsty, in terms of new board member appointments and the imminent retirals of 4 of our board members, Primrose and Anne at the end of this month, and then Bill and Marika next month. So in light of those changes, we've reviewed obviously the committee membership. They're detailed out in Appendix A and will come into effect subject to board approval today on 1st of July and then 24th July respectively. So I would ask the board to recommend or to approve the recommendations set out in Appendix A.
Content to approve the review of the committee structure? I mean, obviously we have an idea of who our new board members may be, but the decisions are entirely in the hands of the Minister. So we're awaiting her confirmation about who these people might actually be. Brian.
Yeah, thanks, Kirsty. I think you've almost kind of addressed the point, but it was just, will we have the opportunity once the new board members are confirmed to have a conversation with committee chairs to help ensure the best fit across the committees?
We will if we can. So my thinking at the moment is that, so obviously I've used some of my judgment about the skills that people bring and why we've recruited them to do that. There is flexibility for a little bit of shuffling, but we didn't want to do large amounts of moving existing board members at this stage. So my current feel is that new board members slot into the existing vacancies, and they've already been shaped into that from my view. And we do a much bigger review after Christmas. Once they've got their feet under the table, we get to see how they're going to fit and how the committees are functioning. And at that point, there'll be opportunities for a major reorganisation if we require that. But as always, Brian, when the names are announced, if committee chairs have a view, I'm entirely open to discussing that and to moving if required.
Yeah, sorry, Kirsty, I wasn't implying anything wholesale, okay. And thank you for that last comment. I'm not suggesting any issue whatsoever. Clearly, I don't know at this stage, but it was just, flagging maybe the opportunity for a quick chat.
Absolutely, I'm entirely happy at that. Leslie, and I know Bill wants to come in as well. Leslie.
Just briefly wanted to note and congratulate Mary on being chair of the People Committee, and note that Fiona is just wish her all the best on RANSC as well, in addition to her deputy chair role. Thanks.
Thank you. And you will have noted that Fiona does have rather a heavy portfolio at the moment. She's taking on and carrying quite a bit of load, and that of course is a temporary thing, again, to tide us over till we get new board members in and get their confidence levels up. I'm sure she'll be pleased and delighted to contribute for the next 6 months, but also pleased when she's able to take a little more of a step back as other board members step in. Bill.
Thanks, Kirsty. Bill McQueen, board member. I have no desire to make you change your plan. I simply observe that on the People Committee, you will, at the end of July, have 3 brand new members of the board, plus Malcolm and Barry on that committee, whereas service delivery will continue with long-standing existing board members. And I suppose it may have been a consideration for you as to whether on the People Committee you might use one of the board members that knows the organisation, rather than have 3 brand new members step into that. But you've got a difficult judgment to make, and there is no perfect right answer to any of that. Sorry, just an observation there. Thank you.
Your point is well made. I did consider it, and it was discussed with the relevant board chairs. I can see Nick is smiling. It was discussed with the relevant board chairs and the relevant board members. And on that basis, we decided to keep where we were. If the existing new board members do take their places as anticipated, there are some very skilled and experienced people there who will need to learn about the organisation, but who have done similar roles in other organisations. So I hope that we'll be fine. But if there looks like there's any difficulty, and in particular if the chair raises a concern, I won't hesitate to swap. Thank you. Content on that basis then to approve that paper if there are no further comments or questions.
Content.
Lovely, thank you. Still with Mark, it's the arrangements for reviewing the effectiveness of the board.
Thank you again, Kirsty. Again, relatively short paper. It's to set out the activities over the last year, to look at board's role in terms of its continuous improvement. We build on, as you know, from 2015 and 2018, 2 very strong Audit Scotland reports that looked into governance in the organisation in detail and gave us some very strong support for the work that's been taking place since the service was first founded. And again, I think some of the details set out in the appendix just show the activities of the board over the last year and taking that further forward. Probably also worth noting, as set out at 2.3, that the current Code of Corporate Governance, which is a living document within the organisation, we last reported it to the Integrated Governance Committee last year against progress with that. We've set out an annual operating plan action this year to develop a corporate governance framework on behalf of the board. And once that governance framework comes back to the board and is approved by the board, that will replace the existing code of corporate governance. It will be incorporated into it. But until that point, the code of corporate governance remains as a live document within the service. So it doesn't diminish until it's replaced, or rather incorporated into the governance framework. Also, probably worth noting over the course of this year in terms of our governance activities, the impact that COVID-19 has clearly had on the operations of the board. And again, I would also like to pay testament to staff behind the scenes, to Rich, Ali and the whole team for the work that they've done to support the board throughout that period of change and the disturbance that we've had to experience. In terms of the appendix, I'm not going to go through it at length, but I think, again, there are just a couple of things that are worth pointing out from the appendix itself for the record. Again, with COVID-19 in mind, I think the steps that the board took very early on in the year to look at the delegated powers of the chief officer and review standing orders and scheme of delegation was very welcome. I think we moved very swiftly, which gave us at SLT and throughout the organisation that ability to move forward, take decisions. Now, we didn't have to use the full extent of those powers, but I think the speed that the board moved in that regard was a testament to the strength of governance and confidence in the management of the organisation, and it was very welcome from our point of view. Again, I think another area to talk about or to note very briefly is we had an internal audit report this year into corporate governance, and again, they gave us a very satisfactory level of assurance. They gave us two areas that they thought we could seek improvement. One was in terms of relationship to the effectiveness of board decisions. We've already initiated that change, as Ali noted earlier on. So in terms of the decision log, we've put down where we'll come back to the board with evidence against the impact of decisions of the board. So we'll have that loop effect running going forward. And again, back to the point that was just, I suppose, raised by Brian in the previous item, we've agreed that we will again review committee structures. We always have a look at them with the board every year. There'll be a fundamental review in the year ahead, with the anticipation obviously from 1st of April 22, those changes coming into effect, not just with the new board members coming on board, but clearly looking at the structure of the board itself. Again, maybe worth noting from an SLT perspective, the committee workshops and the board strategy days and information days, we find them to be incredible value to the service. It gives us that ability to have discussions and conversations in a lot more detail with board members, and that gives, again, mutual understanding of issues, and I think that strengthens board governance as a consequence. We'll continue to obviously support board members in terms of their own development. Access to LCMS, to the Scottish government system as well. We'll continue to improve that, and we'll continue to improve SharePoint site for board members so that you can access information not just about board papers and decisions, but wider issues that are of relevance and of interest to yourselves as well. So again, that will be an ongoing commitment to the board and its own development. And again, Kirsty, I think you touched upon there the appraisal system and the way in which that's helped the board come to an understanding of strengths and skills and gaps in skills across the board, and that's been then carried through into the recruitment exercise itself. And again, we'll wait and see with the new board members how they perform accordingly, but I think the ability to use the appraisal system in that manner is something I think it's quite innovative within the board, within the service, and I know it's something that other organisations have started to look at as well in light of some of that. We've had questions from some partner bodies around it. And then lastly, just that ongoing commitment of the board to gender representation. And I think that's quite an important statement on behalf of the service, behalf of the board, that we will maintain gender balance going forward within the organisation. So with those kind of observations and comments, I would obviously ask the board to approve the report. Kirsty.
Content to approve. Are there any questions before we do so? Bill first, please, and then I can see Brian wants in.
Thanks very much, Kirsty. I'm certainly content to approve this. I think this organisation, the board, does very well on its attention to governance matters, and this paper and the documents appended support that thesis. And I hesitate to suggest this as someone who's about to decamp from the board in a few days' time. I just wondered, with new board members coming on board, the emphasis across all public bodies in doing as much as we can on learning and development and training, and in this organisation, Fire Service, as making good steps for the staff on Learn Pro and keeping records up to date, whether there is any merit in a bit of bureaucracy for board members themselves or the board support team keeping some tabs on board members accessing learning, development and training. So there is some log through the year at the end of the year where the chair can review, and you've at least got some record, or you seem to be wanting to keep track of it. But I'm going, and that's bureaucracy, and I'll leave that to those remaining to think whether there's any merit in just putting a bit of structure around that. You don't want it to be burdensome, and you certainly don't want it to put people off or make life awkward for them. Anyway, that's it. Thanks.
I think it would be, speaking on behalf of the board support team, I think given the comprehensive nature of the reports, the records that they keep, and the spreadsheets that we have around board member objectives and how they're meeting those, I don't think it would be difficult to add a small section about learning and development after that. One of the challenges that we have, I think, across the public sector is that there's actually very little available public appointments and Scottish Government training and support for non-executive directors and for chairs. We do have a chair development programme, but that at the moment is very restricted and it isn't currently running. There are some bits of training which are available to the NHS, but they're not necessarily available to non-execs on other boards, but it might be useful to know that that's some of the feedback I have given to Scottish Government. And you will have noted perhaps on my earlier diary report that I did have a meeting with an independent consultant who's been employed by Scottish Government to actually look at diversity on boards. And one of the things that I flagged there was the lack of training and support to develop non-execs, both as they were getting into roles, but also once they were in role, to make sure that they're performing at their best. So it's a good point well made around the bureaucracy, but the added bit around we need to continue to challenge the Scottish Government and public appointments that if you want high quality non-execs who are diverse, then you're going to have to put in additional support and training for that to work effectively. So I know there's quite a number of people once again, but I can see Brian first, then I think it's probably Vary and Dan. So Brian, please.
Yeah, thank you. And I fully support Bill's point and actually wouldn't describe it as bureaucracy at all. I think it's much more important than that. Just a couple of things, Mark, and thank you very much for a very good report. You referenced the internal audit recommendations, the second of which is around ensuring the effectiveness of board decisions. The report goes on to say it has been fully actioned. Apologies if I'm being pedantic, but is it fully actioned or is it just starting to be implemented? That's one question, stroke observation. The second point I wanted to make is a very positive report, and perhaps as a board member with a vested interest, I've maybe glossed over the areas where we need to perhaps improve upon, and I just wondered, in trying to set out that more clearly, whether you might consider using for this aspect of the report a tabular format so that we could see more clearly what development actions have been previously raised, have we achieved them, and what new actions have been identified going forward, so we have a bit of an audit trail round about all of that. And apologies if that's overly bureaucratic.
Not at all. In terms of fully actioned, I think we have actioned what was asked of us in the internal audit reports. So we have committed exactly to the two things they said. How we will evaluate the decisions of the board, I think we'll have ongoing discussions with board members and committees, etc., as we do so, just so we can build that evidence up and bring it back against the timescales that we've set out in the report. So I'm confident we've fully met the action. And again, by that board commitment to review its structure this year, again, I think we have fully met the action from internal audit on that one. I think the idea about how we formulate this board report going forward, I think it's a good idea, Brian, and again, maybe worth a chat about some of the detail of that, because I think as I say, for me, the amount of development that this board goes through across the year is unusual in my experience. So I think the more that we can make that clear in the report itself, I think the better. So I'm absolutely happy to pick that suggestion up, and we'll have a look at that again over the course of this year for next year's report, but it's a really good idea.
Thank you. Vary?
Thank you, Mary William, board member. It's just a couple of things. I suppose one is just to thank Mark and Ali in particular for the report, but also for their ongoing support throughout the year, and new board members coming in. It's always an opportunity to reflect a wee bit back, and I know that I've personally gained and developed an awful lot in this role, and that's specifically down to the support not just of our board members, but of the team that's in behind and supporting us, and we shouldn't take that for granted as well. And to some extent that leads me into my next point, which is, you know, I think we need to acknowledge the gender diversity on the board, and actually how that isn't reflective right the way across the rest of public appointments in Scotland. So I think that we need to shout about that fact, but actually we can't stop there. And that's really my next point, Kirsty. I know I've touched on this with you before, but for me, it feels as though our next point of development around diversity as a board is to really think about how are we supporting the next group of board members coming through and coming on. And although conscious that I certainly statistically am a younger public appointee, but realistically, if you line us all up, not knowing who's coming onto the board, but if you line us all up, we all kind of look very similar. And actually our diversity isn't necessarily, I think, where we want it to be. And if we want to make sure that we're continuing to reflect the diversity within Scotland, but also to encourage and to lead on that concept of diversity within the organisation, I think there's more we can and that we should be doing around that. So I guess it's just as much a plea, Kirsty, maybe for us to revisit how we look at, we've just gone through the recruitment round just now, but can we start talking now about the possibility of engaging younger people, but also older people, but from different backgrounds and different ethnic minorities potentially, or other protected characteristics to come on board? Because truthfully, I think this is one of the best public appointments that somebody can come into, particularly if they come into it without that experience, because of the strength we've got around the team within the fire service. And actually we need to acknowledge that is a huge opportunity for that. So just a thank you all round, but can we do more, I guess?
Yeah, and I welcome your comments, and I guess that was part of the conversation that I was having with Richard, from who's been commissioned by Scottish Government to try to think about how can we get more diversity on boards, because there is a real challenge in getting people through the public appointments process. And that doesn't mean that there isn't still a lot more that we can do, but we can't select on the basis of protected characteristics. We have to select on the basis of a set list of criteria, and some of the experience that you need to have had in order to meet those criteria is quite excluding of some of the people we would actually like to recruit. So there is a degree of complexity around that, but that means that we need to work much harder to try to make that work. So I absolutely agree that before the next round of appointments, let's put some additional time and energy into that. You'll probably remember that we were considered to do best practice in our last recruitment round, and we have tried to build on that this time round. But that's an indication that we should continue to build on that, not suggest that we've got where we need to get to. So thank you for your comments. Anne, would you like to come in?
Thanks, Chair. Anne Buchanan, board member. It's back to the comment that you made about there not being a lot of developmental resources for public sector bodies. Now, having just joined another public sector body, there are scads of generic tools that are around good governance and all of the things that are important, and it's National Education Scotland through TURAS. Now, you know, these are National Education Scotland at the moment seems to be for health and social care staff, but these are generic pieces of learning that would benefit all board members. So I do think, Kirsty, we should be making representation to NES to say this is a resource for all public sector bodies to access, not just health and social care staff.
I think that's an excellent point. And I know that there have been difficulties in the past with accessing training provided by them, but it's possible that training materials provided by them may well be things that we can ask them about. So I can see Mark nodding, so
yeah, we'll pick that up.
Pick that up and see what we can do, because you're right, it may be that there are some toolkits, for example, that they would allow us access to, even if we're not able to access the training. But let's have another shot at seeing if we can get access to the training too. This is about the public sector. We should not be working in silos. any further comments or questions before we approve that report? No, thank you. Can I suggest we take a very brief comfort break?
Chair Marika wanted to come in. Sorry, you didn't notice.
Sorry, Marika, I didn't see a hand up.
It's not usually important, but actually, and Barry has touched on some of what I wanted to say, and I think the way that Barry made the point around diversity being more than just about gender equality was very well made. I just wanted to, as a departing board member, wanted to say that I, as Bill also said, have always been very reassured that this board takes and this organisation takes governance and appropriate governance very seriously and does a very good job at reviewing our effectiveness against that. And I would like to, in particular, as a departing board member, want to thank the board support team who've done an excellent job and are doing an excellent job in supporting the board and allowing us to be effective. And I've enjoyed that, particularly in the last few years. And we shouldn't take that for granted, because that's certainly not always the case, and it allows the organisation and the board in particular to carry out its role and to review its own contribution very effectively. So I want to just thank the board support team for that.
And well worth coming back in to do that, Marika. I can see from the notes that there's very broad support for your point. Thank you. Can I suggest that we take a break? We are running quite well ahead of time, so I think we can allow ourselves until 10 past so that we can get coffee, refreshments, whatever. So I will see you back promptly at 10 past 11. Okay, welcome back again, board and senior leadership team colleagues. We're about to go into the unwanted fire alarm signals consultation and the proposal for responding to automatic fire alarms. And the eagle-eyed among you will know that we are also in the private session discussing the consultation process, and that's there so that we make sure that the formal consultation documents that go out are the final ones. So if you've got questions specifically relating to that, I would ask you to keep those until we get into that section, please. That said, can I now invite Stuart Stevens to introduce this report, please?
Thanks, Chair, and thanks for that helpful input there in terms of the separate issues on the agenda. So we've reached a really important milestone in terms of the UFAS work, and I'll shortly bring Roy Dunsire, who's the project lead, in to take us through the paper. We are looking for a decision today from the board in terms of the mandate for the consultation. The paper sets out the business case for responding to automatic fire alarms, provides a recap of the options appraisal, a full review of the outcomes of the staff and stakeholder engagement workshop, and obviously our plans for the public consultation and, as I said, the mandate for the consultation. So both Roy and Marisha are here to take any specific questions on the paper in the detail, but I'll pass over to Roy first, who will give us a quick run through.
Thanks, Stuart, and good morning, everyone. So I'll just briefly cover the highlights of the sort of three areas relevant to the recommendations in the report, if that's okay, and then happy to take any questions or listen to any observations you may have. So you'll note from the report that we've tried to provide quite a detailed overview of the options appraisal stages that we've been through to get us to a point where we have three options that we wish to consult on, and the key decisions that we've taken up until now, you know, they have been influenced by staff and stakeholders during the workshop, and the UFAS Review Project Board, SLT and Service Delivery Committee, they've played a role in oversight and scrutinising our work on a regular basis as well. And the main section of the report that focuses on the outcomes of the staff and stakeholder workshop that tested the 5 options that were shortlisted from a long list of 15. And that workshop was independently facilitated, and it led to the 5 options being assessed and scored by the workshop participants on a balance of benefits and risks. And you'll also note from the report that it provided a platform for staff and stakeholders to also put their views across. And we'll have outlined that in the workshop key discussion points section of the report. Section 3.7 of the report, that summarises the findings of the workshop, and it's these that were kind of compiled and reviewed to come to an overall scoring and ranking of the options, and draw conclusions and considerations in the report, which covers the recommendation to discount option 2, which is the COVID-19 interim response as a permanent model, and go forward and consult on options 3, 4 and 5 as our potential models for responding to AFAs. And if you've had an opportunity to go through the further reading pack, hopefully that gave you an understanding of the sort of more detailed aspects of the workshop and how we went about actually reviewing and reporting the results to the workshop participants. You'll see that attached to Appendix B there, covered in the report as well, is the consultation and communications plan. That's been developed by the Comms and Engagement team, and it covers the plans for raising awareness of the consultation, and following consultation, how we're going to communicate and implement the preferred option. And that plan is very much a working document, and it will be regularly reviewed during the consultation by the consultation subgroup, which has been stood up. And finally, attached to Appendix C is the consultation mandate that Stuart referred to, which sets out in broad terms the scope and purpose of the consultation. And subject to approval of the 3 options for consultation, we're asking the board to approve the mandate and therefore authorise consultation on the 3 options for responding to AFAs, which plans to commence on the 19th of July for a period of 12 weeks. So just to recap, the recommendations that we're asking the board is to note the outcomes of the review of the staff and stakeholder workshop, approve plans for consulting on options 3, 4 and 5, and in doing so approve the mandate for consultation. Again, happy to answer any questions, and as Stuart said, Marisha is also in on the call if there's anything specific to the consultation exercise. Thank you.
Over to you, team. Leslie.
Thanks, Stuart, and thanks, Roy. Let me say at the outset that I think that this piece of work is an absolutely cracking piece of work. The number of unwanted fire alarm signals has been a concern of ours for some time, and we have given you a hard time over it. But this piece of work is absolutely superb, and I'm just delighted to see it getting to this stage. Can I please just come in with a few points, a couple of substantive points, and then I've got some points on the EQIAs, particularly in relation to the consultation. So the couple of substantive points, could you remind us, Roy, the nature of the moral dilemma faced by the OC staff? And also, can you just note, I think for the board minute, that there has already been consultation with OC staff as well. Will I just run through what they are, Kirsty, and then if the Stuart and Roy, yeah?
I think it makes sense. I can see Stuart taking bits of notes around them, so I think it makes sense to list them all out and then you can address them each.
Okay, thank you. Second point is, I think that I would feel comfier if we could set out a bit more in regarding the nature of the savings. So I know that we are working more on this, but I think we need to get it across to people that quite a lot of these savings are not cashable savings, because people see the numbers and they go, oh, that's fantastic, that's more money that can be redeployed. But we know that a hefty chunk of it, majority, I don't know, is non-cashable. So I would really like to see a bit of discussion around that in the consultation. On the EQIA and the consultation related to that, it's great that we are doing the video in British Sign Language, but the number of British Sign Language users is much smaller. It's great that we're doing it, but it's much smaller than the number of people who speak Polish, Urdu, Punjabi, Chinese in our society. So just did we think about that? We may not judge that we need to do it for this consultation, but perhaps for future consultations on other matters. Is it good enough that we say just try Google Translate, because Google Translate it's got ups and downs, and especially in technical areas may not be sufficient. On the second EQIA, we talk about how risks are managed, and this is in relation to call challenging. And we say if a person doesn't speak English, we'd use an interpreter. How would that work when somebody is phoning to report a fire? Those are my points. Many thanks, Kirsty. But again, just to reiterate, they're against a context of this, I think, is a cracking piece of work. Really, really excellent work, and just congratulations to all involved.
Okay, I could answer I'll give a bit of context to the moral dilemma, which is in that discussion point section of the report.
Please.
Yep. That moral dilemma relates to not mobilising a response to an EFA, and it's been a policy, under our permanent arrangements to send at least one appliance to an EFA, or an average of 2 appliances actually, even if it is a confirmed false alarm. So understandably, this change may take them out of their sort of comfort zone and feel a bit uneasy about not sending a response to, an unconfirmed EFA. But as you can see from the report, we've all been engaging with OC staff during the consultation to listen to their issues and concerns, and training OC staff will obviously be a key aspect of any plans for implementing the preferred option, to ensure that they have that confidence to make decisions around not responding to confirmed false alarms. And just to reassure you again, OC staff have been involved in this process right from the start. They're represented on the project board, they're represented on our working group as well, and these staff are supportive of the options, and going forward, we are planning to hold engagement sessions during the consultation process with the 3 operations controls. So that's another piece of work that we'll be doing during that consultation process. Hopefully that answers that moral dilemma aspect in that consultation around OC staff.
Thank you. And I can see Marisha's got her hand up, so I'll bring Marisha in next before I give Stuart an option to come back in.
Thanks, Chair. It was just to pick up Leslie's queries around BSL and alternative formats, if that's okay. Yeah, I completely understand your point around BSL, Leslie. The problem that I've had in previous consultations is they're quite an active group. So also English isn't their first language, and that's the only way they communicate. So we've got no other way of getting our message across to that particular group, which is why we produced the video. It's actually easy for us as well because we've got good partnership links with the schools and stuff. So it's an easy thing to do, which is why we've included it. We've engaged with a company that can do the translations of our documents at short notice once requested. Again, just from my experience, we very rarely get that request, and the Google Translate is a bit of a backup plan. So what we have to do is produce just a text version of the document, so not the full designed one, that's just compatible with Google Translate. So we're just trying to cover as many bases as we can to improve that engagement.
Yeah, Leslie, please come back in again.
Thank you. I would welcome a response regarding whether we can say a little bit more about cashable, non-cashable benefits, and the point about the call challenging. This is, let me just find it, it's page 118 of the new pack.
Yeah, Stuart's happy to address those points, Leslie.
Okay, yeah. Thank you.
In terms of the point around about the EQA, and in terms of somebody doesn't speak English, that's exactly the same position that we currently find ourselves in any 999 call that we have at the moment. So it'd be no different from if somebody was to phone in at the moment. But what we do is, if there's any doubt, we mobilise. We always fail to save. So if somebody was to call and it was an emergency situation and the call challenge couldn't identify whether or not it was a fire or not, we would mobilise, Leslie. So that's the point of that.
I think in that case, it's really important that we say that, because we say that in the above bit, but we don't actually say it here. But I thought that would be the case, Stuart, and I'm just reassured on that. So let's say it. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, it does reference that it would be treated as per existing policy, but I think for the avoidance of doubt, we should perhaps expand that and include that, what that actually means. So we'll include that in that element, Leslie. In terms of the cashable, also the non-cashable benefits, they are set out within the consultation document in a bit more detail in terms of impact on the organisation, more capacity to do other things, less impact on staff, and also the positive element that it would have on duty holders and premises, including the health premises and things like that as well. So that is set out within the document as well, that additional detail.
Okay, right, and set out in sufficient detail to kind of counteract the great big headline potential savings.
Yeah, perhaps I'll cover that when we get to the document later on in terms of how that's laid out.
Okay, happy with that. Many thanks, Chair.
Brian, please.
Thanks, Kirsty. Sorry, I thought I was further down the queue there. In a sense, just I want to echo Leslie's positive comments here, but perhaps, you know, as a bit of a total novice when it comes to the subject matter and the whole consultation process, I thought it was just a great example how the service has worked with comms to put all this together. So a lot of all these questions are not necessarily about the technical content, it's about how we're doing the messaging and stuff. And I think it's a perfect example of that working as it should. I think also an observation is that it appears to be so appropriately incrementally paced. You know, it's really taking us and those that we're consulting with, you know, step by step through the process. I mean, there is a clarity around about all of this that I think is hugely commendable, and I'm sure it will be criticised, you know, in some quarters, but in terms of the effort that's gone into the clarity, I think it's absolutely commendable. So thank you very much for that. I did have two questions. One, because there always seems to be a question around, yes, but was the population sample size that you used adequate? So I just wanted to ask, in terms of the professional opinion of Animate Consulting, were they satisfied that kind of 5-panel workshop type thing, which is such a foundation, is actually adequate? The second point, Stuart and Roy, if I may, is in the body of it where it talks about issues, issue number 8. This is, forgive me, this is at paragraph 3.10 or thereabouts, 3.11, sorry, the key discussion points for issues. I suddenly became aware that it says it should also be noted that that activations from an alarm system designed to pose a risk to life should always be accompanied by a backup call by the occupants confirming the fire. So it suddenly dawns on me that that important requirement clearly is being ignored in 99% of cases. And I just wondered, you know, I know you must be aware of that, but have we made efforts to try and address that very specific thing that's obviously been a specific thing for a very long time? So apologies if that feels like we're stepping back, but I was just genuinely struck by that bit of information.
Yeah, thanks for that, Brian. I'll perhaps pick up that final point and ask Roy to cover the part around about Animate Consulting. So you're absolutely right that there should be a call that comes in for the premise to say, or the premises to say that there is a fire. And as you say, in the majority of cases, that is not forthcoming. But we do target premises in terms of a fire safety enforcement activity and our UFAS champions to proactively engage with those premises to make them aware of their responsibilities to let us know the service. Clearly, that's not as effective as we would like, but we do reinforce that on numerous occasions, and we have the current UFAS policy, which has a number of triggers, which trigger off letters being sent, visits from a fire safety enforcement officer, and in really challenging cases, potential for enforcement action to be taken on the premise as well if they're not adhering to the Fire Scotland Act or the elements of the Fire Scotland Act that pertain to UFAS and the management of UFAS. So yeah, hopefully that answers that question. Okay, thank you. And Roy, I'll bring you in terms of that.
Sure. I'll pass on to Marisha. That was Marisha's team who kindly organised animate consulting. So if you don't mind, Marisha, you can maybe give a bit of context to that, that would be great.
Passing the baton.
That's teamwork. No problem at all, Roy. To answer your question, Brian, again, there's not a hard and fast rule about what is a representative sample. I think the discussions that we had about setting up the option appraisal event was making sure, again, just on the basis of experience, that internally we didn't outnumber the external stakeholders. So that was a very conscious decision to make sure they were the majority view in the room. And also Roy and Mel and my team worked very, very hard on identifying the appropriate stakeholders and making sure, again, the ones we'd identified as the high interest, high influence, the ones that will be most affected by any changes were in the room, you know, to the point where we were really trying to find people at quite short notice to make sure that we had, like, for example, island communities represented and things like that. So I would be assured that we have enough evidence to support. We have made sure that event was representative of our key stakeholders from that.
That's great. Thank you very much.
Okay. Tim, please.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of points. One prompted by Leslie there, just to remind everybody, there are some absolutely fantastic crowdsourced translation services that you can tap into should you need to. My other point is not really actually so much about the consultation itself, but it is one that I think is worth asking at this point. One of the metrics we track quite considerably at service delivery and of course across the rest of the service is response times, and we're always looking at how they change over time. I'm just minded to ask, do we have a sense of, if we introduce call challenges to some of the, you know, such a busy and active part of our work currently, i.e. UFAS, as Nick would have it, what impact is that likely to have on the call response times, just so that we have we thought about it, but also can we be prepared for an adjustment in our monitoring should we take one of these courses in the future?
It's a good question, Tim, and I do anticipate that there would be a slight increase. So there's three elements to response times. There's the call handling time, which is obviously the control element, the time to mobilise, which is obviously for the crews to actually mount the appliance and move, and then there's the travel time to the incident. And those three things collectively make up the response time element. And we do call challenge at the moment, and we've done call challenge quite and more detailed during COVID to make sure there was no COVID implications for the crews attending premises, and we did see a small bump in terms of that first element, that call handling time. So in truth, I think we will see a slight increase, not an increase enough to make me concerned around about the overall response time element to it, and I think that the benefits outweigh that small increase that we would see to the call handling time element.
That's very helpful, Stuart. Thank you. It wasn't so much a criticism; it's just so that we're aware of these things when they happen, so that we don't sort of throw the baby out with the bathwater when these things happen. Thanks a lot.
Mark, is it on that particular issue?
Yes, it is. Just to give again further reassurance to Tim and other board members, what we'll also do from the data team perspective is we'll re-baseline the indicator. So assuming we make the policy change, we will note the policy change as part of the performance management, re-baseline, and then any variation thereafter in response times, we can note the effect that the change in policy has had. So it's a conscious choice that's had that impact, rather than somehow there's a detrimental performance dip within the service. So we'll make sure we catch that in due course as well.
Thanks, Mark.
Vary.
Thank you. And this might be a question that you want to take later on, Kirsty, so I'll be guided by yourself, but it's really just a small thing, I guess, and it's actually to invite a little bit of reflection for my own assurances from Marisha. I suspect that we're going into another consultation on the back of another consultation, and I guess it's just how are we differentiating those, which just before you come in that point, I suppose then there's elements for me whereby I get why I'm assured that there is sitting behind this then the high importance, high influence diagram that Marisha is talking about. But from my perspective, when I'm seeing reference to stakeholders, and to the public, it's not giving me the nuance in terms of where the targeting for the consultation may be going. So off the top of my head, I'm thinking, well, FSB and the Chambers of Commerce would be an obvious stakeholder group for this, but the actual reference for me to seek the assurance isn't maybe necessarily coming through because we're grouping it at a really high level. But I'm assuming that the Chamber and the and FSB are involved in this. So I guess just possibly a wee bit of a reflection for my own assurance purposes that they are a particular target around this.
Yeah, they absolutely are. To give you the assurance, we've got a stakeholder list of almost 900 now, so obviously very difficult to break that down for the consultation mandate, which is why it's grouped the way it is. But yes, we have, and again, we keep it under review, and obviously if people contact us, plus we've set up the proactive stakeholder database, we can add to that as we move through the consultation. In answer to your question about timings, it is we do finish one and start the other. I think what's important is they're different groups really that we're targeting and a different ask of them. You know, we've done a document review consultation for the long-term vision. This one is very much options for change that we're asking opinions of. So our approach is different and more detailed, whereas I think our consultation for the long-term vision is largely light touch at this stage.
Content on that basis? Yeah, thank you. Nick.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, just yes, and thanks to the team for all the work that's gone into this paper. I won't reiterate everything, but we've had an opportunity to look at this through the Service Delivery Committee extensively, and it's excellent. I've got 2 points. One is just a daft laddie question, and forgive me, I've written something down here and I can't relate it to a paragraph, but the subject matter experts who are smiling away here will be able to tell me straight away. Could you just explain optimism bias level, please? It occurs in the document, but I have lost the point at which it occurs.
That optimism bias level, that was in relation to the COVID-19 interim response that we've already reviewed. We estimated that we'd realise a 32% reduction in blue light responses, whereas we actually realised a 21% reduction. So that difference, that 11%, was discretionary mobilising. So the optimism bias, the 11%, we've then considered and factored into the 3 options, the options A, B, and C, whereby we've added, or we've removed a 15% optimism bias of those options to take into account that discretionary mobilising. Does that make sense?
Excellent. Right. Yes. Thank you for that. That explains something which I thought I understood, but actually I don't think I did fully. So thank you, Roy. That's great. And Chair, if it's okay, I've just got one clarification question, probably to ask anybody really. Is we've looked at this, and this is great background reading. What is precisely the board being asked to do at this point is yes, we're agreeing that we will move to consultation, and then in the private section we're going to look at the consultation document. Exactly. Is that correct?
That's exactly correct.
Thank you. That's just so I understood. Thank you very much.
Stuart, would you like to come in again?
Yeah, just Roy made a really interesting comment there around about discretionary mobilisation, and it's just to kind of circle back to the previous discussion around about mobilisations and translations and stuff like that. That's a really good indicator of where our OC staff use their skills, expertise, knowledge to discretionary mobilise based on partial information or they've been passed at time of call. So that's a really good indicator that works quite well. So it's just to kind of highlight that point.
Thank you for that. Are there any further comments or questions? Okay, so can I just reiterate my thanks to the team for a really very comprehensive, well-researched, well-prepared document, which I know has been a long time in development to make sure it is as robust as it possibly can be. Thank you to board members for their scrutiny of that, and if I'm understanding correctly, we are now content to approve this report and move on to something that I know that all of us are very keen to see progress on. So thank you very much indeed for that.
Okay, thank you.
That takes us into our next section of the meeting, and we've got the resource budget monitoring report. And John, I believe you'll be supporting us on this.
Morning. Yes, Kirsty. John Thompson, Acting Director of Finance and Procurement. So this morning I'm presenting to you on the resource budget monitoring for the period to the end of May, effectively seeking scrutiny and advise the board regarding kind of the resource budget position. So just to recap, the resource budget for 21-22 was agreed by the board at £284.7 million, and that was an increase of 8.7 million over last year. In terms of the report itself, I have included a new section around budget environments to give more visibility of the changes to budget allocations to date, and also just to show some comparison against the approved budget, which was approved on the 25th of March. The main changes reflect the refinement to the forecast to the end of March, and also the allocation of business cases approved by SLT in April. The current resource budget monitoring highlights a year-to-date overspend of just over £60,000, and we forecast an overall underspend of £259,000. Kirsty, you mentioned earlier on about the pay offer, and effectively the uniform pay offer by the employers through NGIC is 1.5% compared to our budget of 1%. This will add approximately 0.7 million to our costs in the year, and that has not been reflected in this forecast, and we don't tend to reflect it in the forecast until we get acceptance around an offer. So just to kind of point out some of the main areas of variation to the forecast against budget, particularly around employee costs and kind of property costs. On the employee cost side, at 1.2, you will see that the whole-time employee costs are forecast to be £128,000 overspent, and that's due primarily to higher overtime costs than budget, and it's partially offset by a reduction in the kind of forecasted recruits compared to the kind of budget position. At 2.2, the control firefighter costs are also forecast to be £92,000 underspent, and that's due to vacancies. And at 3.2, retained costs are forecast to be £142,000 underspent, and that's due to payments for attendance at drill nights being lower than budgeted. And finally, on the property costs, you will see that there's a forecast of £153,000 underspent, and that's due to the early sale of Thornton and subsequent reduction in rates and utilities, which I hope the board would welcome. So just to finish, the risk areas I would want to highlight to the board, and those are noted at 5.1. And SLT have already agreed actions around those risk areas and to manage them through the rest of the period. The overriding financial risk to SFRS at this time is actually that we have an underspend across the resource and capital position, and that's something therefore that we will closely monitor and continue to report. I open it up for questions from the board.
Thank you, John. Bill.
Thanks very much, Chair. And John, thanks for the paper. It's as good as always, and I like the extra info on environment. I'm coming to a point that we've laboured as board members, and especially those of us on staff governance, now the People Committee, and it's in your annex, it's section 4 about the support staff underspend costs, which are offset by the use of agency staff. And I come back to the fundamental question, do we absolutely know what support staff posts we do want to fill with substantive appointments? And are we going out as rapidly as we can to try and get those folk in and on the books? Is COVID scuppering us in any respect regards that? Or are we still uncertain about how many of those vacancies we do want to fill with permanent staff and therefore we're comfortable rolling forward with the agency staff costs that we use to cover, albeit that we're likely paying more for agency people than we would be if we knew that we wanted a permanent appointment with right skills and support staff. And if Scott, I see Scott on the call, it may be that Scott has more to offer on that, John. But that's my point. We've been at this for a couple of years or more, and we're still seeing underspends on the budgeted support staff coming through. Thank you.
Thanks, Bill. If Scott would like to answer that, if not, I will have a go.
John, happy to come in. Thanks for the question, Bill. I guess primarily we'd always look to fill our support staff vacancies with our own staff and not use agencies where we can. What we're interestingly finding in your point relating to COVID is that it's actually agencies aren't coming through for us in relation to providing pools of staff that are suitable for some of the vacancies that we've got. So through the work that we're doing within the organisation, we're looking at alternative ways of accessing the market, which is quite a competitive market at this moment in time, we have to say, and there isn't a readily available pool of people just waiting for roles. I think it's very much an employees market at the moment. I guess what we're looking to do, for example, in terms of those different approaches from a pod perspective, for example, we just went out with a generic ask for people to get in touch with us. So we're looking at alternative ways out with our traditional recruitment ways to access potential candidates. So we are exploring alternative options there, Bill, but just in the point in the agency, we are finding that the agencies we've got that we approach through the frameworks that we have in place, that there isn't a significant pool of staff there, so we are exploring other alternatives.
Thanks, Scott. I'm suggesting again, I'm conscious that I'm going shortly. You might want to have more debate about this with the People Committee at upcoming meetings, because we've had a strong interest in let's understand what we want to achieve here and the best ways of doing it. And has our demand actually changed? You know, do we need all the posts filled in the way you first thought amongst the support staff? But you give me a decent answer and I'll leave it there. Thank you.
I'm actually going to invite Ross if that's the issue that he wishes to come in on, because I've just seen his hand go up.
Thanks, Chair. And it's just really to build on what Scott's spoken about there, and without stealing our own thunder for the strategy day on the 29th of July, in terms of our COVID recovery work, there are a number of business cases that directors have brought forward that have been supported by SLT and are indeed referenced within the finance report, where we are making some specific focused recruitment decisions round about very much to support the recovery from COVID. Scott leads a particular tactical action group looking to progress all of the recruitment necessary for those posts, and has indeed done a lot of work with pod colleagues to streamline our recruitment processes. So that's a very specific piece of work that we're doing this year to bring in either temporary or permanent members of staff, primarily to support COVID recovery, and also business as usual activities as well. But more detail will be provided on the investment that we're making in that and the processes that we've got in place and the specific roles we're recruiting to on the 29th of July.
Thanks, Ross, that was helpful. Before I go to Marika, Primrose, can I just ask, is that on the very specific point that was made about the People Committee?
Yes, Kirsty, thank you.
Please come in now then.
Thank you for bringing me in on that. I think it's just an observation I'd like to make, obviously as a retiring committee member, but I think it's very helpful seeing the figures, and it's something we don't currently have within the People Committee, is seeing the finances that back up against the manpower. I think it would certainly be very helpful in, going forward if that was available without giving undue extra work. But I think the finances that John has shown us there dovetail very nicely with the questions that Bill's been asking and would be very helpful going forward.
Yeah, but I know, Primrose, that's something that you have previously flagged and that we've said we would like to do as part of our governance review and strengthening that. So we'll note that in the minute and see if we can begin to introduce the figures that sit alongside the staffing, because you're right, it's more helpful. Thank you. Marika.
Yes, thank you, Kirsty, and thank you, John, for the very helpful overview. I had a question about the costs relating to COP26. Now, I know, and we've been over this before, that the expectation is that these will be fully recovered and sort of been excluded from the forecast. But I note in what you put forward for the forecast of the overtime costs that these are projected to be about 300,000 due to the profiling of out-of-pattern rostered days to ensure capacity for COP26. And these costs, so the 300,000 is included, as I understand it. Now, am I understanding that right? So that those COP26 related costs are included in the forecast and that these will not be recovered? And is there any scope for them being recovered?
Okay, Marika, I think just to be clear in terms of the use of OPRR in relation to COP26, what we've decided to do as an organisation is to try and hold back some of that OPRR to look at the during the COP26 period for business as usual type activities, because it's going to be a really busy period for us. What we want to do is make sure that if there is overtime costs that are directly attributable to COP26, they will be recovered as part of the business case process. So I think it's maybe just a wee bit of clarity in how we're looking to take it forward, Marika.
Okay, that was my key point, that they would be included in what will be recovered, but that is the case.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Lovely, thank you. Fiona.
Thanks, Kirsty. My question is about the 44 business cases, the 7.2 million. I was really just wanting to understand what the main sort of themes were. Ross has already mentioned COVID recovery. I just wondered what the other biggies are in there.
The main areas cover a broad range of recovery, Fiona. Ross has probably got more detail around those kind of broad areas, so I'll probably bring Ross in if that's okay.
Yeah, please.
Thanks very much. Yeah, and just to build on the point I made earlier, and as I said, the strategy day on the 29th of July will provide further detail of that. But just for answering the question, it's across a number of areas across the organisation, and there's probably not a directorate and not a function that's impacted, but the key areas that we're supporting are, first of all and most importantly, to make sure that we've got the relevant resources in pod to be able to support the business cases, the recruitment necessary to bring in a number of additional post holders. There's a number of posts going into prevention and protection as part of the recovery, both from a community fire safety and a legislative fire safety perspective. There's a number of posts going into health and safety and training in order to support their recovery as well. And probably the other big chunk of posts are posts going into the people training, finance and asset systems programme, or probably more accurately to backfill for existing staff that will go in to support that programme. So that's very much the flavour of it, Fiona, but cutting across a number of areas of the organisation, and we'll bring a full breakdown, as I say, to the strategy day on the 29th.
No, that's very helpful. Thank you.
Vary.
Thank you. I think Marika's actually already covered most of what I was going to ask, but just two little things, I suppose. One is just apologies if I've missed this somewhere, and I know it's only a small amount, but why the need for the increased security at the new British training facility and the costs associated with that? But the other thing was as well, I'm just curious, will the People Committee be able to track in terms of not just the costings and the figures that Primrose has already picked up on, but it would be useful to understand how much of the support staff vacancies, etc., is down to long-term vacancies being left open, or is it down to an attrition or retention issues just out of curiosity, because there's quite a significant movement within the workforce, I think, at this level within Scotland at the moment. And it'd be useful to understand what the long-term retention issues are within the SFRS, and have they been impacted by COVID? And again, not necessarily for now, but just pinning it out there, because I don't think it's a finance issue, but it would be useful to understand whether or not we think increased flexibility in the future would be likely to change that position in terms of recruitment options. But again, I think that's a conversation more for the People Committee than for now. Sorry, John.
Yeah, no, Barry, if I can maybe just respond to the specific point around the security, and if we leave the other element perhaps for a later discussion. Basically, you may be aware that we had some issues with travellers at the Newbridge site. We thought we had managed to move them on from that site. However, they have appeared back in the area, so therefore we felt it appropriate that we extend the security around Newbridge, and that's the reason therefore for the slight uptick in terms of security costs.
Thank you. And Martin, I can see you've raised your hand. Would you like to come in at this point on one of the issues that's currently being discussed?
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for your question, Barry. Just to talk about support staff. So in 2019, I asked SLT to undertake a review of all the vacancies that we had across the organisation to address the long-term issues that we perceived that we had, and we'd certainly talked about within RANSC. And as a result of that, I think it was the beginning of last year, but I sort of lost part of last year completely. I think it was the beginning of last year, we'd got to a point where we had identified all the vacancies that we required and had capped off all the long-term vacancies. Then COVID has hit, and you're quite right, we've seen a fairly significant movement at that level across the organisation, which is reflective of what's happening in Scotland. Certainly the initial feelings we're getting and feedback from staff about the flexibility and the agile framework that we've put in is that we're likely to attract from a much wider pool of individuals across Scotland to fill the vacancies that we've got, which will also open up the diversity issues that you quite rightly raised earlier on, where people couldn't necessarily travel to a location, but can now actually work from home and fulfil the job role that's required with the skills that they've got. I'm expecting on the 29th, when I do the presentation to you with John Thompson, just to cover off a lot of these issues so that you then get a really good understanding and then take direction from the board whereabouts you'd like all this to be monitored, which I suspect will be the People Committee, not wishing to commit the board to making the decision, but that would seem completely appropriate. And then we can start to track things all the way through, so you can see not only how we're spending the money and the people that are coming in, but the impact that those people are having on the organisation as we run through the next 2 or 3 years of recovery.
Yeah, and I think that's an exciting new phase of work for the People Committee as we move forward under your chair. Brian.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, John, for the paper, and I welcome the additional information on environments. It does raise a question in my mind that part of our conversation around about environments was whether we would want to set delegated limits for environment. So I'm not sure whether that's still an unanswered question, but I'll kind of leave that sticking to the wall. Maybe it's for answering at a different time, I don't know. But I observe, looking at the additional information, and of course that's the danger of giving us additional information, that from signing off at the board on the 25th of March, within 3 weeks there had been some fairly material adjustments to the budget, and it just poses a question in my mind about the timing of that. Could it not have been foreseen, or are we actually coming to the board a little bit earlier than is reasonable to come to the board? But within those environments, I mean, there's in absolute terms measured against the overall budget, that there's nothing which is significant. But if you look at the budgets round about supplies and properties, there's material adjustments between 9 and 11% over these two budgets. And I'm struggling to understand why all of a sudden these things were required to happen and couldn't have been flagged at an earlier stage. So I was just wondering about the timing of that, and whether we could do anything to get to the position where the board is seeing a budget that doesn't need to be adjusted so early on in the year?
Yes, Brian, thanks for that question. You're right. I give you more information on budget environments, which then leads to more questions. Just to answer the point, we obviously do the actual budget based on the February forecast, and we use that to guide us as to what the approved budget will look like. We then make sure that we're refining that budget position as best we can with the most up-to-date information up to the end of March. And therefore, on that table to the kind of left-hand side, you will see some changes that are coming through in terms of employee costs and in terms of the apprenticeship levy income, etc. So that's the changes that have happened, if you like, if you want to say the material changes, the changes that have happened to the budget. On the right-hand side is more about the reallocation of the budget costs, and that reflects the business cases that we've talked about or we've been alluding to. So those changes effectively move from or move resource into the kind of the salary area and take some resource out from the kind of supplies and services area into the property side. So it's a reallocation primarily based around the kind of business cases. But as we've said already, we are happy to go through the detail of those elements as part of the strategy day at the end of July.
If I may just come back in, I kind of accept all of that, John, although I think that there are a couple of points. One about the timing of it, whether there's an opportunity to do these things slightly earlier or bring the budget to the board slightly later. I think it would be good to understand why at a practical level we can do that. And if I can pick up another point which you and I have discussed in the context of the Deloitte work, the point about are we doing adequately zero-based budgeting that would potentially reduce the reliance on the end of year outturn figures. So I'm not disagreeing with what you said, I'm just not 100% persuaded by the argument.
Yeah, okay, so coming back on the timing, we obviously went to the board at the end of March, and we would seek to make sure that we have an approved budget before the beginning of the financial year, and that's a key requirement for us. So we have to go with the information that we have to hand at that point to formulate the overall budget. I accept the point, and I guess the point is things do move and things do change, and therefore it's also right for us to reflect the latest position so that we want to make sure that we don't have significant variations when we have a better understanding of what the budget allocation might be against those expenditure lines. What I would also say to you, Brian, is that we don't use budget environments on a regular basis. We are very clear that we want to highlight and explain variation against actual to the budget position. So we tend to see this more as an activity moving across just from the approved budget into the uploading information into the Tech One system. So I hope that answers your point around timing, because I think we have to bring that information to the board at that particular time, and I do think that the adjustments that we make thereafter are reasonable adjustments.
I'm going to invite Martin to come in to comment, and I will bring you back in again, Brian.
I think this is one of the most interesting areas for the board scrutiny, and you're right, the more information we provide, the more questions you ask, which is completely and wholly appropriate, and that's exactly what should be happening. And certainly we've given that commitment, I've given that commitment to the chair, that as we go through this year, we'll come to a strategy day, which is going to be on the 29th, to talk about the financial information, the reporting of the information, and actually how we support you making the decisions or providing the scrutiny that you do of our overall budget. And that will include the environments and actually how we do environments and whether there should be a delegated limit, and if so, what that should be and how that would work in reality. So those we've discussed in the last two, so this board meeting and the last board meeting, that's coming in July. Once John's bedded himself into the acting director role, started to produce some more information for you so you can see some of the flavour of things coming through, and then we'll continue to refine it and support you as board members in providing your scrutiny role and also supporting me as a capital officer.
Yeah, no,
would you like a final?
Yeah. No, I'm content with that, John and Martin. I wasn't wanting to sound critical about these points. It's merely an observation that 3 weeks after an event, something changes. But I've made the point, and perhaps when we have the session at the end of July, perhaps you could say something about the timing of that process. That would be helpful.
Happy to pick that up, Brian.
Absolutely. And can I just say I welcome the additional degree of visibility of some of these movements. I think it's entirely appropriate that we should be asking questions about it. And I'm really looking forward to that discussion in July, including around environment limits, which I think is something that we collaboratively need to make decisions around. So I think that'll be excellent. On that basis, are we content that we have scrutinised the Resource Budget Monitoring Board and we can move into the capital budget?
Content.
Yep. Thank you. Please, still with you, John.
Okay, thanks, Kirsty. So, board members, this is to seek scrutiny and advise the board on the capital monitoring report for the 2 months to the end of May. At 2.1, just a reminder that the capital DEL figure for 21-22 is 32.5 million, which, as you will know, is the same as previous years. As noted, however, at 2.2 and 2.3, in addition, we now have anticipated capital receipts of just over £1 million relating to the sale of Thornton and also of Madison. Thornton, I would highlight, was anticipated next financial year, and we managed to get a sale in early April this financial year. In addition, the transition to net zero grants for electrical vehicle infrastructure of just about 1.2 million is included in the funding for this year's capital programme, and that takes the overall capital programme to 34.778 million, and that's noted at 3.2. In terms of where we are, the capital committed or paid to date is about 12.2 million, and that's about 35% of the overall budget. At 3.3, I have included, again, a new section on budget environments to explain the movement in the budget. To date, the budget environments highlight the inclusion of the Thornton receipt into the programme. As I said, that was something that we didn't anticipate, and therefore it came in early in April. And also, we have moved some funds from one of the training lines into the Portlethen facility, and that's because we wanted to accelerate the phase 3 USAR training facility at Portlethen, and that was agreed with the training directorate. The detail of progress to date is noted at 3.4 and 3.5, and it highlights at 3.5. Sorry, it highlights the progress next month. I would like to really focus and take the point to highlight the risks at 5.1. We have basically looked to consider the overall capital programme. It's very clear at this early stage in the year it will be really challenging, and our focus in terms of our delivery of the capital programme will be on that. It will be about the deliverability of spend, because we know that we have significant challenges. And if I can maybe just expand a little bit on what those look like. So we know that we are incurring delays in the delivery of fleet and of ICT, and that will lead to expenditure being incurred later than planned. So we put orders in for new chassis, new bits of ICT, etc. What we're being told is, actually, you expected maybe that to come in, June, July time. In reality, that's going to be much later in the period, probably March next year, which gives us a degree of risk in terms of the overall capital programme. So we'll need to work on those deliveries and work hard to make sure that we get things delivered within this financial year. The other element of risk around this is about construction costs of our current builds. We have seen significant and substantial increases in construction costs, and this will lead to changes in terms of overall total cost for projects for delivery in this period, and we can anticipate therefore that there'll be change requests coming through for projects in and around where construction is involved. So I just wanted to highlight those risks because I think that's an overall factor that actually encompasses everything that we'll talk about in terms of our capital position this year. And I'll open it up for questions therefore.
Lovely, thank you. Bill.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, John. I'm interested in that rise in construction costs because we hear exactly the same thing at the health board that I'm on. How does it work in practice? You've got about 15 million in your capital programme for property works this year. Some of that will have been signed and sealed years ago, and the contractors are now on site or about to come on site. Are all these contracts with clauses that allow adjustments to be made in their favour if world prices of raw materials and so on change, and we're at their behest, as it were, there? And have you got a percentage estimate? There were some horrendous figures in Lothian's latest estimate of capital costs for new general practice facilities being built against estimates submitted to us just 18 months ago. I think from memory, you're talking 20 or more % now expected to be the completed cost than we were advised just a year or so ago. But I see Ian's hands up. He'll be able to respond on all of that. That's my general point. And presumably you have to adjust your timing of bringing projects forward to stay within the 15 or 16 million you hope to spend this year, unless Scottish Government chucks a bit more money at us. Thank you.
Thanks, Bill. I was going to give you an overview of that because there has been an increase in terms of what we anticipate in costs. There's around kind of anything between 10% to 30% over a range of areas. And your point around projects, it's specific to the contracts that we've got on particular projects, but I'll leave that to Ian to perhaps describe in a bit more detail, if that's okay, Bill.
Okay, thanks, Chair. Ian Morris, acting director of asset management at the moment. We seem to be in the middle of a perfect storm at the moment. If I can paint the picture of what we have got there, and it's obviously known out there in the wider media that is going forward, we have a global lockdown which has restricted manufacturing processes across the entire field of semiconductors, over raw materials, and going forward, the price of raw materials with regards to for concrete and steel has went through the roof. It has been exponentially high, and the availability of these products is where the problem's starting to come in. As John alluded to there, we'd ordered chassis, pre-ordered the chassis at the very beginning of the year, anticipating the normal 18 to 20 weeks delivery. We've been informed that we won't see these till mid-March or early March at the very optimistic roll. We've also have a problem with our European community. The European crafts and trades that are in this country are migrating back to Europe. So the construction industry with regards to access to the European workforce has diminished, and our subcontractors and contractors are coming back and saying there's a real challenge with regards to that going forward. Layered on that, our construction sites are operating at 40% of the capability due to the COVID secure. Nobody envisaged that this pandemic would be ongoing for the 18 months. So the COVID controls within the construction sites have been very limited, and the contractors have to come up with very innovative ways on how to manage these contracts going forward. We also have a layer on top of that where Scottish Government have intervened and said that we have to support the construction industry where we can, and making sure that we expedite payments in various elements where that's visible going forward. And I can touch on that later on, probably within the Chief's report in the private section on one of these projects specifically. But what we have there going forward, as well as the Contracts that have been awarded through the NEC3 contract, which you alluded to, Bill, do have the facility for an increase in cost where abnormals come into play, i.e. a worldwide pandemic, the increase in raw materials that we just spoke about, and the demand in the workforce. So there is ability for them to increase costs going over this. There are also within these contracts what they call the prelims element, the elements with their own site, and various elements are rolling on because the contract is rolling on longer than what was anticipated. So their prelim costs are being attributed to the cost of these contracts going forward. What we are preparing under the Chief's instructions, we're preparing a more strategic overview of how this is going to impact, and that will be fed back through to SLT and to the board. We are working with ICT and others to look at our supply chains to see what's there and how we can manage the supply chains and what guarantees we can get from them with regards to the contracts that have already been awarded going forward. We're also looking at this in a very holistic way, that nothing we're doing here will be changing away from what was the agreed 3-year capital programme. What we're trying to do here is to foresee where we've got pressures this year which will possibly knock on to next year, i.e. we'll be slipping this year and moving some of the projects into next year because I can't complete a fire appliance, I can only buy the chassis, but the first, second, third engineering stage payments won't happen this year, they will impact the next year. So what we're trying to do is, based on the 3-year capital programme, is draw forward the key elements where we do have contracts and we can accelerate the contracts such as PRE, ladders, various other elements which we know the supply base is more, the supply base is more confident on. So that's the programme that we're working through at the moment, and that's what John's alluding to going forward. We did have some slippages last year at the tail end, right at the tail end because of COVID, which we're having to mop up as well as we go through this process. So some of the slippages in some of the bigger projects like Portlethen and McDonald Road and others, we're having to adjust our programme to go forward with that. They came in late on towards the March sort of year end. We thought we would spend X, Y, and Z. We didn't. So that gives you kind of an overview with it going forward where we are. And I dare I say it, we do also have a Brexit implication as well going forward, where we have seen in the latest tendering process, we're in the middle of a standstill period at the moment, where we actually seen a differential of £137,000 per vehicle with one of the tenders. And obviously I'm in a standstill period, I can't get into any detail about that, but that was the difference in price between one of the vehicles going forward. So these are some of the realities that we have got and we're dealing with at the moment, and we're trying to manage our way through it. And I hope, Bill, that's giving you some reassurances that we are all over this and we are looking at this in a forensic detail.
I'm very grateful, Ian. Thanks a lot for that full explanation. I guess the challenge in particular is come the back end of the year to not leave us underspent if we've got any capacity to spend absolutely up to the hilt. But thanks again.
No, Brian, you've got your hand up.
Thank you. And just as this wasn't going to be my line of inquiry, but Ian, you certainly can't be accused of sugarcoating the truth. But as a board, we need to understand the brutality of the situation we're in. So thank you for that. But I have to say, on the back of that I think the combination of you and John, we're well placed to respond to it. So thank you to you both for doing that. Just going to the report itself, John, I mean, as we've kind of discussed in the past, financial reports are really just a lens to look into the organisation and look at its performance. And I really welcome your focus on risk and talking us through those risks, because it's not just about the numbers, it's about the risks associated with those numbers. So that's a development in this report that I really do welcome. My question is really about looking at the organisational performance rather than the numbers, and it's around our programme of electric vehicles and the impetus that there is and the funding that's available to do that. So there's a lot of pressure to move in this direction. But it just raises a question in my mind whether we are, and I'm sure we are, but I just maybe like the reassurance that we're constantly kind of evaluating whether we're getting ourselves into a position that ticks a number of policy boxes, priorities, but are we at risk at some point on that journey of ending up with a model which isn't as operationally effective because of the limitations of these devices? And I wondered if you could just say, and probably it's down to you, Ian, to respond to that.
Okay, thanks, Brian, for that. First of all, that wasn't sugar-coated, my first part of it, going forward. The vehicles, the electric vehicles, you're touching on an area where we are acutely aware of. The last thing we want to do is bring in a Betamax model into the service. It doesn't work elsewhere. What we are doing now is working closely with Scottish Government's ambitions going forward with regards to meeting the carbon reduction, as well as the industry technology. Now, if I can be quite clear, we'll never, as a fire service, doesn't matter whether it's the UK or the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service, we will never drive forward the level of change in the technology with regards to commercial vehicles. It will be done by the hauliers and the big main players coming forward who will drive that forward. What we have agreed and what we've managed to secure is £500,000 funding to look to bring in a prototype electric vehicle, fire appliance. This will be working with service delivery with Stuart Stevens' team to look at the optimum base to be. Now, that'll be a city centre somewhere, whether that's Glasgow or Edinburgh or whatever, that's still to be debated. But if we can get into a production model and bring an appliance which we will then trial to death over a period of 12 to 18 months minimum, and to learn off that. Now, what I will say is that appliance that we bring in for that 12 to 18 months will never be the appliance you'll go into production with, because the technology is moving at a pace which is unprecedented since Henry Ford introduced the Model T back in the early days of motoring. We can never keep up with the technology at the moment. Volvo just introduced the first electric 14-ton HGV, but again, the range capacities and what we needed to do when you move into a pumping environment are still well away from what the ambitions of the service would be. But what I can give the reassurance to the board is we will not do a knee-jerk reaction into something and end up with the service with a Betamax. We are working with police, ambulance, the RNLI, the NHS, looking to making sure that we bring in a blue light charging infrastructure that allows any officer, whether a police officer, ambulance or NHS or fire officer, to be able to use the same system and charging going forward. NHS are leading on the back office operations to support that, and we are fully engaged with that going forward. So do I think electricity is here to stay, or the electric vehicles? Yes, absolutely. When you see the major players like BMW and Audi now, putting millions of pounds, billions of pounds worth of investment in it, they're not going to walk away for that. So it is here to stay, in my opinion. And that's for somebody that's got a fleet background and would never have thought we would moved at the pace we are moving at the moment. It is here to stay, but we just need to be spot on and make sure that the products that we bring in are fit for purpose to allow our operational officers to go about their duties. And I can give you that reassurance. There's a lot of work and a lot of due diligence behind the scenes getting done on that.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Brian, can I just maybe raise the point about funding as well? So we are also very much involved with Scottish Government around funding applications around this. We've got a really good position and a story to tell. We've done a number of pilots. We've worked well with Scottish Government in the past around funding. They know that we can actually deliver against this requirement. We've also got our climate change response plan. We are clear on what it is that we are trying to do. So we are finding that we are having really good discussions with Scottish Government and therefore well placed to receive funding where appropriate for carbon reduction, and in particular around the kind of electrical infrastructure that Ian has commented on. So just to give you reassurance, we are definitely wired into those funding points, because that in essence will help us in terms of our overall asset condition and also help our backlog of assets as well.
Thank you, John. That was very helpful. Any final questions on that report, capital asset reporting? No. Content in that case that we've appropriately scrutinised and we're able to move into our next area. And that next area is our combined risk and performance report Q4. And that is going to be with yourself, Mark, I presume. Yes.
Yes, thank you, Kirsty. Can I make a couple of points just before we turn to the report, just as part of the context? I think, as noted earlier in the agenda, when Nick and Primrose gave their update on the committee, they both alluded to the performance reports that they scrutinise. And again, it's just for the record to put for everyone to know that, you know, detailed level, forensic level scrutiny of performance is covered across those committees, and also with RAC with respect to risk. What we present in this report is a high-level overview of performance to give that added layer of assurance to the whole board. And I think it's just important that we kind of note that for the record. This is not the totality of performance reporting to the board. And some of the comments I'm going to make around the board are a kind of summary of the year, if you like. We report on a quarterly basis to the board because there are seasonal variations that are important to note in our performance because of factors out with our control. But what we've agreed is that for next year, we will develop an annual performance report that gives the overview that I'm about to give as part of a kind of verbal update today, but in obviously a much more structured way in terms of the report to the board, just to supplement the quarterly reporting that takes place, and so that the trends, etc., are much more better delineated for board members, but also for members of the public looking into our performance as well. So having said all of that, in terms of the report itself, if we first look at the strategic risks that we're reporting through the report, 4 are sitting at very high levels of risk on red, and 5 are sitting at amber. Myself, Richard and Brian had a meeting last week where we discussed for the year ahead how we will develop this bit of the performance report going forward, because beneath this there's a lot of work takes place in terms of risk actions and mitigations that have obviously crossovers into performance, and we're now going to look at ways in which we can pull some of that information into this report through on a much more structured basis as well. So this is an area we'll develop a bit further in the year ahead for you. In terms of the annual operating plan elements of it, again, just as a reminder, we started the year back in March of 2020 with 63 actions in the AOP. Obviously, because of the impacts of COVID, we have streamlined that back over the course of the year so that there are 42 actions that we're progressing throughout the year. And again, I think it is just worth putting on the record that with the context of COVID and all the work that staff have had to put into it this year, the progress that we've still seen against the annual operating plan, I think, is pretty remarkable. And I will put all the success down to staff. In terms of the areas where we've perhaps not progressed as we intended, I, and I'm sure senior strategic leadership team colleagues, we take the responsibility for that. The actions of the staff, the work of the staff, I think throughout the year has been absolutely incredible to keep us moving in the way in which we've moved. So in terms of the annual operating plan actions, and I'll pick up some of these later, 23 are sitting on green, 19 we're reporting as amber, 19 are not reported fully, 16 amber, 3 are red. One of the reds is in my own area. It relates to the internal communications review, and again, as board members will remember, we paused that due to COVID so the team could focus on COVID communications. It's now back up and running, and we're making good progress with those actions, and they will continue to be reported as part of the residual element of the report into next year until they're complete. So they don't disappear. We will keep reporting to the board until we've concluded all those agreed actions. In terms of the performance data side of the report, there are 17 indicators that we report to the board, and you can kind of see them detailed out. But what I'd like to do is just to give, again, a little bit of wider context around about some of that to kind of hopefully put it into a bit more detailed sense for board members. Over the course of the year, we attended 7.1% less incidents than we did in comparison to 2019-20. So COVID did have a significant impact on the overall activity levels of the service. UFAS was a big impact in that. There was a 19% reduction in UFAS. Sorry, I should also say these are still preliminary figures. We're still going through the final audit checking on them. So when we do the official statistical publication later in the year, there may well be some minor amendments. But we saw a 19% reduction in UFAS, and in road traffic collisions, we saw a 33% reduction. And again, that reflects a lack of traffic, particularly in the first pandemic period of the pandemic on the roads, and therefore a reduction in RTCs that we would attend. In terms of fire incidents attendance, so the pandemic does not appear to have had any significant impact on our fire numbers in terms of the actual attendance. In terms of accidental dwelling fires, we remain with the long-term trend. We saw a 5% reduction in EDFs across the year. At the very beginning of the pandemic, in the first lockdown, we postulated with more people at home for longer periods of time, would we see an increase in ADFs? That's not been the case. And again, I think a lot of that is down to the work that has gone on in terms of the Make the Call campaign, trying to get our message around safety out to as many people as possible, and using additional channels, including things like Twitter and Facebook to reach the audiences that we need to reach with some of those messaging. So again, a lot of credit to colleagues across P&P and communications and supporting us in that. In terms of the seasonal variations, I say that's a quite important dynamic for us. We tend to see a spike in performance or a spike in incidents in spring, and then again in November, round about, obviously, bonfire night. This year, what we saw in terms of the spring peak was an earlier peak. Normally it occurs around about the second part of April and into early May. There was a period of good weather, late March of this year, and we saw an increase in outdoor fires, which has driven an increase in the overall numbers in terms of deliberate fires, because all outdoor fires are classified as such. So there is a slight peak in the numbers, but it's entirely weather related. In terms of casualties and fatalities, non-fatal casualties, so if you like accidents where people were injured at a fire incident but didn't lead to a fatality, we saw a 30% reduction across the year, which again, given what we postulated at the very beginning of the year, is quite a remarkable figure. Overall, what we've seen, that reduction is consistent across all LSO areas. So not only is it a Scotland-wide improvement, it's something we've seen in every single LSO area as well. And total casualties across fires are down by 12% across the piece. So again, a significant improvement for ourselves. In terms of fatalities, again, slightly different picture, worth reporting and dwelling upon some questions perhaps around. Across the 5-year period from 2014-15 to 18-19, our annual totals range from around 40 to 46 fatalities each year. That's our kind of rolling average, if you like. Across 19-20, there was a significant drop in the figure. We were down to 28 fatalities in 19-20. This year, our provisional total, there are still some post-mortem reports that are outstanding, so the provisional total is 53. So it's an increase significantly on the year before, but it's not a massive increase against that three-year rolling average from 2014-15 onwards. Now, that could be a consequence of COVID, or it could well be it's just we are dealing with very small numbers, and therefore you see volatility in numbers. We have saw back in 2013 a similar peak following what was a year of very good performance in terms of casualties. So we have seen these patterns before. It's inherent in small volatile statistics. Again, I think if we just to look at the numbers differently to give you a bit of context, if you look at it as a calendar year, in 2019, so rather than a financial year, we had 41 fire fatalities, and in 2020, 44 fatalities. So again, it's the old adage, isn't it? Lies, damn lies in statistics. It depends upon the particular perspective you look at the numbers. So while in the financial year, as I say, we have saw a substantial increase this year, that has been reported in the media. Actually, the numbers are very much along the lines of our traditional trend. In terms of those media reports that you may have seen last week, we've reached out to the MSPs involved and we've asked them, would they like to have a meeting with myself and Stuart, and we can put some context and detail around about that, and hopefully they'll take us up on the offer and we'll report that to the board in due course. So in terms of our rolling averages, in terms of casualties, fatalities rather, over the course of the year, they have come broadly back into the usual range. We saw that spike, as we reported to the board back in the first quarter of the year. Across quarters 2, 3 and 4, it's come back more into the normal trend. A more detailed dig into all of this is being prepared at the moment, and we'll bring that back with colleagues from the data team and the fire investigation team to give you that annual report on fatalities and casualties, but just to give you the high level at the moment. In terms of home fire safety visits, again, critically important part of our work. We have undertaken just over 20,000 home fire safety visits this year. Clearly, the impact of COVID has been important. We have worked consistently with Scottish Government guidance around safety and when is it safe to enter homes and so forth. But what we have done is focus on high-risk households. And just about over half the visits this year have been to high-risk households. In those households, we've increased the number of smoke alarms that were fitted, smoke detection systems. It's now standing at 38% against a previous year's figure of 32%. So again, that's an important trend for us to note. In terms of fire safety audits, again, there was a significant impact due to COVID, as we can well imagine. And while we are below our target, in the last 2 quarters in particular, we're beginning to see those figures come back up, and that's given us a great deal of assurance around some of that. In terms of availability, again, I would like to just draw your attention to it. In terms of the retained service, retained and volunteer service, in Q4 that was at 88%. And again, that reflects primary employment and the ability of RVDS staff to be able to make themselves available to us, but testament to them. And for whole time Q4 reports, it was at 97.7% availability, which again is a remarkable figure. That's linked also to our absence figures, which have been very positive this year. And again, as detailed in the report, both for short-term and long-term absences, they are down against the trend. And again, that's testament to staff. And I think to the work we've done in terms of the well-being of staff throughout the year, that's reflected itself through in lower absence figures. So again, I think that's a very important point to note. And lastly, for me, just to quick note around response times. We are seeing a change in our response times across the country and across the types of incidents. We've spoken about this before at the board. We're preparing a much more detailed presentation on this. I think it's scheduled for now the September board strategy day, where we will take you through some of those changes. Obviously, lower level responses, so the quicker responses, we're seeing improvement. At the higher end, less so, but we will unpick all the factors behind that, including the types of incidents, where they occur, when they occur in the year. That gives you the contextual explanation for why we are seeing that alteration in the pattern. But just to give you that assurance that that's coming to you, we originally scheduled it for July, but we've rescheduled it to September because those that are involved in that are both on annual leave at that point in time, but we wanted to have a report to the board. So with that, Chair, I'll hand it over to board members. Clearly happy to take any questions, any observations, any comments from board members.
Lovely, thank you. Questions, comments? Yes, Barry.
Thank you. It's just a wee question, Mark. When you were talking about the staffing, sickness levels, illness levels, availability, is that just the uniform services, or is that overall?
Overall. And again, when we contrast that, Mary, with our colleagues in other services, we have had a very good year in terms of staff absences, and we look at not just blue light, but other emergency services and other public services. We have done incredibly well in our staff absence, not just COVID element, which has been better than most, but just in general as well. And again, I'll pay tribute to colleagues in health and safety and POD for the work that they've done to support people across the year.
Thank you.
Anything else from any other board members? Comprehensive report, Mark, so thank you very much for that.
Thank you, Kirsty.
It was there for scrutiny, so we have duly scrutinised, and that takes us to the Chief Officer's report to the board for 2021, which is for information only. Martin.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you, colleagues. I was doing this last year and then we hit COVID, so you didn't actually get an annual report, which was going to be my first reflections on being the first year in the job. And I started this report not very long ago, thinking it was going to be a short paper to you as board members, and it's turned into a fairly lengthy tome of all the incredible things that the fire service has done in Scotland over the last 12 months, in addition to responding to COVID. And I'm going to develop this over the course of the next few years, and I'd appreciate feedback from you, not necessarily now, but if you've had time to read it and when we catch up with each other, about how it's worded, how it's structured, other things that you may wish to see in there. But certainly this is my reflection to you as the board on the things that I've seen that we have done as an organisation in the last 12 months, how we've responded to COVID and provided that structure for you so you can see how things have flowed during the year. It was only as I was going back through SLT papers to the board did I start to understand, even though we're in the midst of it and we're doing this every day, just the depth and the quality and the excellence that I believe that we've delivered as a fire and rescue service during the last 12 months. And all the things that you heard, certainly from, I think it's been really helpful to have significant visibility on the stuff around assets and equipment from Ian, and understand what's been delivered in the last 12 months against a really difficult backdrop, and also then understand that the underspend in the capital budget is going to be £862 of last year, and the underspend on the revenue budget's 2.9 million, which is exactly as we projected it would be. but in the context of everything that has gone on and what has been delivered, I would commend this report to you as a good record of the work that staff have done as they've gone over and above what we would normally expect of them, many of them working from home, firefighters working in very difficult situations to provide the service that we provide in Scotland. And Chair, happy to take any initial comments from board members if it's appropriate.
Yes, please. Quite a number of board members with questions and comments, and starting off with Bill.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you, Chief Officer. I thought it was an excellent piece of work and a full, frank account of the year. And what I particularly welcomed was your open discussion of things that have gone well in our negotiations and engagement with representative bodies and things that were difficult in that terrain. And I think it's not always the case that organisations put frankly into the wider domain just, you know, what is going on in those things. And I think it is a good thing that all our staff and interested stakeholders can see that we're working away, trying to make progress with all our different partners, but it's not always easy, and we can't always mandate what we want to happen because we're part of bigger systems and structures that govern industrial relations. So I did read it virtually cover to cover. I thought it was excellent. I commend you. I haven't really thought about a formal question, but are we wanting to do anything to promulgate this more widely, or will it just sit on the shelf? We'll draw staff's attention to it, and it's there on the website for others to look at. Or are we going to punt it out and around to all stakeholders that we usually engage with when we're producing strategy documents and such things? Maybe a comment on that might be helpful, but thanks.
Thanks, Bill. Mark has a cunning plan.
Yes, I've got a cunning plan. So to get the report to you was a bit of a rush job in the end in terms of formatting. So what we're going to do, Bill, off the back of today's meeting, any adjustments we need to make to the report, we'll do that, and we'll get a slightly improved design put over the report with some additional photographs, etc., put in, and then we'll publish it accordingly. So it will be published over the course of the summer in the next few weeks. So it'll look slightly different to this version. This even quickly in that design format, but there's work going on in the background to that effect.
Lovely, thank you. And given that it is such a useful piece of summary of activity, it makes good sense that we would do that. So thank you. Malcolm.
Yeah, thanks, Kirsty. Again, I thought it was very interesting, and it just shows the depth, the complexity, the number of different issues that the service has been taking forward in that period of time, when you see it all sort of written out like that. My only thought in looking at it was, I think it's a great reflection of all the work that has been done, so to speak, externally by the service. I didn't see a great deal of reference to things like the leadership development that's been going on, the great improvements in things like performance reporting that we've seen coming through, how we're managing that. So I don't know if that's a kind of deliberate focus. Again, you could make this thing so huge, but it was just a thought as I read through it. And my only other comment is a very specific one on page. You don't need to reference it, but page 191 of the papers, page 9, where building works, you see the work we did with our contractor at MacDonald Road in Edinburgh was identified as best practice by the Scottish Government, used a template, absolutely brilliant. So again, just are we recognising that in any other way, or are we celebrating it? Because like a lot of things, we're very busy getting on with our work, and there's a lot of good stuff. So, how do we just make sure that people themselves are thanked and recognised, and how we publicise some of that stuff?
Thanks, Malcolm. Yeah, certainly the leadership development framework I missed, and Liz has given me an appropriately hard time for that. But it was in the midst of I've missed a couple of things in the report, and we scrutinised it at SLT yesterday. And Mark is quite right. This has been turned around in a very short space of time because it was supposed to be a short paper to you. and many staff have pulled stops out to get it to the place where we can present it to you. So there's a couple of things we're going to reflect back into the document, and you've identified 2 of them, so I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Nick.
Hi, Chair. Thank you. Martin, thank you. I hate repeating what's already been said. It was good. I read it with a smile on my face, particularly the first part where I could just imagine you sitting at your desk writing this. That's good. I do have some feedback for you. I'll do that privately via an email. Just some thoughts. I've got so big thanks. I do have a question about whether or not it is a bit long. That's the only point I'd say, because if we really want people to read it, but there's so much you want to get across. That's the dilemma that one faces on a document like this, I guess. But I have a light-hearted question to ask you. Para 214. I may be being a dim here, but I don't understand what regular fogging. You haven't forgotten an L there, have you? A flogging, or
No.
what's regular fogging?
So certainly there's no second L missing from there. So the fogging was part of the COVID secure requirements we put into place, where workplaces were fogged and therefore disinfected in layman's terms from COVID virus. And it was an exceedingly effective way of working.
I even looked it up and did see a reference to that misting thing, but I didn't relate it. So thank you. No, but excellent piece of work, Martin. Thank you very much.
Lovely. Thank you. Marika.
Yes, thank you. Well, I too read this with great pleasure. Actually, it was interesting because at first I started reading it and I thought, why are we getting this type of report from the chief officer? Because we get reports all the time and we have an annual report, and why are we getting this? And then as I was starting to read through it, I thought, this is by far the most useful and most informative report that we have actually ever had in terms of what has really been going on. Yeah. So in that sense, it provides actually a really good piece for reflection, and it avoids some of the, maybe not the traps, but the conventions perhaps that other reports go into, where they can be so bland that actually the true information is no longer in these reports. So it does leave me with the question as to what, if we are to continue with this, or you, I mean, I won't be part of this, you know, what the purpose of this report will be alongside the sort of formal annual report, and what the audience of this will be, as opposed to the audience of our formal annual report of our activities. Certainly for the board, I think this is very informative, very appropriate, and probably could form the basis of a you know, a reflection session at the strategy day to sort of say, well, you know, what are the key points that we might want to think about a little bit more here and just reflect on. But for an external audience, I thought, oh, I wonder where this sits alongside our formal annual report, or what it tells us about what needs to change about the annual reports that we so far have usually put forward. Anyway, those were my sort of thoughts about it. I did enjoy it, and it left me with a huge sense of pride, I suppose, about the achievements of the organisation in the past year. Thank you.
Thanks, Marika. I think you've made a really good point that we discussed in SLT yesterday, in that the annual performance report drives us down a particular road and tends to hem us in terms of what we can put within the report. And as you've quite rightly identified, it misses out a huge amount of what we actually do as an organisation. I think the trick for us going forward, and how I construct this in future, is how we write once and use numerous times. So capture once, use numerous times, as opposed to continue rewriting reports. And that's certainly something I'll be exploring with Mark, so that we don't have to spend lots of people hours in doing unnecessary work. But I appreciate the comments you made. Thank you very much.
Anne?
Hi, echo everybody's comments. A couple of thoughts. when we've decided the kind of finished format and you've added things, one of the things, Martin, I thought we might add in are the Queen's Medal recipients. But the other thing I was thinking is, would this not help the LSOs and community planning partners? I think this would be a superb read for, yeah, I think the LSOs could take this out and promulgate it.
Good, and that's a really good catch as well in terms of the QFSM recipients, Anne. Brilliant, and thank you. Yes,
Leslie.
Thanks, Martin, and again, I reiterate what everybody else has said. My point is on the section relationship with the unions, which I'm guessing will be pored over by a number of stakeholders. And I wonder, just picking up on your point about right once used repeatedly, do we have and should we use here a 4 or 5 line summary of the watershed moment where the offer that was made on pay was rejected, and whether, because that is the key bit of context that underpins the detail in that section. And it's just what your views on whether such a 5-line brief would be helpful, and whether it might be helpful in this particular situation.
certainly. Again, that's something we discussed yesterday, and that was in 2019-20 as opposed to 2020-21. So we're going to make a small adjustment to that particular section and talk about the broadening the role, or the desire to do a multi-year pay deal for increasing the skills of firefighters still being a live issue. And I'll certainly read that section again in the context of what you've said. I'm not sure at the moment. My leaning is not to, however, but I'll reflect again on that. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
Brian.
Yeah, thank you. Marika kind of asked my question, so I was going to lower my hand, but I thought I would just come in on it anyway, Martin. I mean, like others, it's a great read. I don't know whether when you started to write it, you had intended for it to be widely and publicly available. But my observation is that because it is such a good read and such an honest reflection, whether it will by default become the authoritative document, you know, whether it's this year or going forward. And I would really just reflect very carefully on the implications of this document to other things. That's not to suggest you should not do any of what you're suggesting. It's just, I mean, my interpretation, if someone said to me, what is the document that I should read to understand what the fires, it would be this document, you know. So is that at the detriment of some other things? And I don't know the answer, I'm merely posing the question.
It does beg bigger questions, I agree, and I'm not sure at the moment yet either. And I didn't intend it to be for wider publication when I started it, but then I intended it to be way shorter. So it's grown arms, legs, and then something else. So we've reflected it within SLT, and we're going to continue to do so. And to think, if it does become that authoritative document, what else should be referenced in it, so that you've got the links from this document to all the other things that you should read to give you the broader context of the service, including PI information, performance information as well. So there's a few things to go through at the moment with this report, I think, Brian, so thank you.
Vary.
Thank you. Just a few things. I mean, I can almost hear people's eyes rolling. I bet there are some format questions for me, but I know you're going to pick those up.
Yes.
And depending on where you go, to some extent, and this isn't a criticism, Martin, because I agree with every positive thing that's been said, but the document feels as though it's having a bit of an identity crisis, because I don't think that those things have really been resolved in terms of, I agree with Nick, if is it too long potentially for what it was originally intended? If it's going into that more direct point that Brian's picked up on, I think for me there's some things that maybe need to go in, starting from very basic formatting stuff, including contents pages and etc., and the links that you're talking about. So I think the identity of the document and its purpose needs to be a little bit more resolved for me, but actually the content's really interesting. I like the fact that as a chief officer you're getting the opportunity to put together a reflective document. I think actually as a chief officer that's a really important thing to do, because you can get lost sometimes in not really getting an opportunity to reflect on everything that has been achieved in that period of time. I do wonder whether or not it would have been worthwhile taking it to the earlier period, you know, to be able to cover the entirety of that time that you haven't had that chance to reflect on. For me, there is an element missing, and I'm not sure, Martin, if it's my fault for maybe scanning too much of it and not reading it in detail, but the corporate parenting and the youth volunteering elements, I think they should be much more front and centre. Their responsibilities that we have, and also I don't know if there's a value potentially to reflecting on some of the areas that are worked upon either within the community planning elements of it, I don't know, or within the justice agendas. It's just, are we hitting all of the sweet spots, if that makes sense, in terms of our responsibilities within the report? But actually I think it's really important for you to be able to be given this chance, but I think we just need to resolve what it is that it's trying to do. I hope that makes sense.
It does, and so I think, so reflecting on the length, I'll look at it again. I think it's the right length for the amount of things that we've done in the year. I think in the terms of the leadership framework, it's definitely going in. Youth volunteering, we didn't do a busting amount last year because everything was in lockdown, and actually it was launched the year before, so I wouldn't reflect on it this year. And in terms of the identity of the document, it is my report for you as a board. Now, what it morphs into as a result of me producing it, I think we'll have to review backwards once it's morphed into that document. And I think we can then reflect back on that document later on in the year and say, okay, for the report I'm bringing to you next year, what do we now need to put in place? Because actually this document has morphed into X, Y, or Z. And I think that would be my intention. So it is a very honest reflection of where I think we have been in the last 12 months. But you're right, as a result of that, it is definitely going to morph into something that I don't think we can predict just at the moment, but we might have to backtrack on a couple of things and add things into it as we go when we find actually people find it really useful or actually don't find it really useful.
Yeah, please come back in again, Barry.
Sorry, one point I forgot, and one point just, I appreciate the youth volunteering wasn't so much developed this year, but I'm just going back to the minister and the minister mentioning it at the annual review, and I suspect that it's about understanding to some extent not just what we particularly have done, but also what our stakeholders are most likely wanting to hear about to some, and that's where the identity for me is that part of this report, is that part of the annual report, but that's fine, Martin. But the other thing that was missing that I forgot to say is I would really like to hear from you, depending where this document's going, as to what are your personal ambitions for the following year, so that to some extent, if I'm referencing back to this report, that's setting almost a tone for what I would expect to come through in the next report. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, no, it makes complete sense. That's a really good point as well. And I hadn't forgot about corporate parenting. I will include that because we did a fair amount of that last year, and that needs to be referenced at some stage without making it longer.
Primrose?
I would just echo what colleagues have said about, I thought this was a fantastic report. I'm probably slightly erring away from some of what's been said. I think the audience for this, I really welcomed. It was your personal approach to this. I think if we start making links to the other corporate parts, it might become too corporate, and it actually will take away from the fact it's your personal reflection. I think that makes it extremely powerful. And I think we're very good as an organisation corporately at giving all of our other corporate reporting. So it's only a personal view. I think there's a power to it being a separate part of your reflection. And if that's annually there, we can pick up most of the other, we do a plethora of things that we pick up on a lot of different quarters. So I think it's important that it sounds like it's come directly for you, and I think that came across, and that was very, very helpful.
Thank you, Primrose. I really appreciate that.
Excellent, thank you. Are we content on that basis now that we have, well, we've given feedback, because this was for information, that we've given feedback to Martin to help him develop this, and then for the decisions we made about how this is going to come out to others inside and outside the organisation. Yeah, good stuff. Thank you. We've got two further main issues in this section before we begin to wind the meeting up, and that's around health and safety. The first is the health and safety annual report, and then we've got the health and safety policy and statement, both of which John's going to address, and again, which have been through the People Committee, I believe. But if I ask John to introduce the health and safety annual report first, please.
Chair, thanks very much. Good morning, Board. Good afternoon, Board. John Dickey, Assistant Chief Officer, Director of Training, Safety and Assurance. Colleagues, this health and safety annual report has been presented to the Board today for information. As the Chair has said, the report provides an analysis of the key areas of performance during the reporting year and details some of the intended risk reduction approaches on some of the key themes that we've identified, such as driver safety and musculoskeletal injuries. I'm not going to go into this report in any great depth at all. However, I do have my Head of Safety and Assurance, Julie Harkins, with me as well, in case there are any technical questions that I would not be able to answer. As you can see from the governance route, this report has followed all the governance process as required, right up until the Staff Governance Committee, which was on, the People Committee, which was on the 2nd of June. And with that, Chair, I'm submitting this report to the Board for any questions or any other scrutiny.
Lovely, thank you, John. Leslie.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, John. Good to see this. Looking at paras 3.13 and 3.14, this is the rate at which firefighters are injured, i.e. firefighter is injured every 1,100 incidents compared to 890 last year. So it's great to see that reduction. My specific question is, does that include UFAS? So if there's, for example, an increase in UFAS numbers, then that would lead to a reduction in the rate of firefighter injuries. So technical question, and the broader question is, what do we see? Presumably, the reduction in the rate of firefighter injuries is due to this work. Just confirming that that's what you see. Second point is about, apologies, that last point was badly phrased. Hopefully you understand what I'm trying to get to. Welcome the big increase in the closing of health and safety plan actions. We're now up at 47%, but just confirming that you'll be looking to substantially increase that going forward as well. Thank you. And I know that COVID has interfered with the rate at which those actions could be completed. Thank you.
Leslie, thanks for your questions. I won't bring Julie in just yet. I don't think that the number of injuries that you'd asked specifically if UFAS is linked to them. Yes, they absolutely are. Every accident, every injury is captured. So if there was one at a UFAS incident, then that would be captured. So hence, and the Stuart's team's already alluded. Yeah. You put your hand up, Leslie. Sorry.
Sorry, I was just flagging to come back in once you had finished, John. Apologies. On you go.
All right. So there is a correlation between the number of UFAS incidents we attend and potentially that, but we're not drilled right down to that detail, although we do know where each of the accidents or injuries happen.
Yeah, okay. So working on the basis that accidents and injuries are much less likely to happen at UFAS than at operational incidents, it does mean that part of the reduction in the rate of officer injuries is partly due to an increase in the number of UFAS. Is that right?
So, Jock, if I can maybe perhaps help.
Yeah, go Stuart.
Within the consultation document, it sets out how many accidents and vehicle injuries, how many injuries and vehicle accidents would be reduced through reduction of the UFAS stuff, Leslie, if that's helpful.
Am I right in thinking that the rate of officer injuries is less at UFAS compared to other call-outs?
No, not necessarily, Leslie, because anything can happen at a UFAS incident. Someone tripping coming out of the fire appliance tripping over anything at all. So there would need to be a lot more in-depth analysis of that, Leslie, to get that answer.
That's absolutely fine. So what I'm taking from that little discussion is that the reduction in firefighter injuries is a real reduction as a result of the health and safety work, and has not been in part kind of benefited from an increase in UFAS. So many thanks for that explanation, Stuart and John, appreciated. And
Leslie, your other question was regards the improvement plans actions. Yeah, these were impacted by COVID last year, and specifically the operations directorate, but that was absolutely down to their full focus was on dealing with COVID. What I can say is moving forward this year, we've seen an increase already in the number of improvement plans, but I need to caveat that with, as we take some off, others come on. So that's why the target is never trying to get 100%, because it's moving in both directions, but it is monitored very closely. That's great. Thanks very much, John.
Lovely, thank you. Anne?
As the outgoing chair of the People Committee, I would just like to commend our decision to put ACO John Dickey in charge of health and safety. Having somebody senior operationally has made a big difference, and the organisation is now giving this the priority that we should have always been giving it. So I think it was a superb decision, and well done, John.
And thank you, but I need to put that to Julie Harkins and Cam Lockhart and all the team of health and safety. They do all the hard work. But thank you very much for your sentiments. Very much appreciated.
You've provided the leadership, John, and that's what was missing. Was not. Please don't think I was being disparaging about the team.
I knew you were.
It was the leadership that you've given around it that I think has made the difference. So thank you.
Very kind of you to say.
Brian.
Thank you. Yes, it's actually a question for Primrose, if I may. Primrose, sorry for putting you on the spot here, but just in terms of the scrutiny that the People Committee is able to exercise, is it sufficient, adequate to discharge the board's individual and collective responsibilities round about health and safety? Sorry for putting you on the spot there, but it's
okay. That's a fantastic last question for my last meeting, Brian. I think it is, and I think what I'm also pleased to see is that we have great liaison with our colleagues on the Service Delivery Committee. So it's not just the one committee that's overseeing the look at this, and the sort of questions that we've just had raised with Leslie just previously there are the kind of questions that we address in the People Committee, but if there's anything else that comes up, it goes through to Service Delivery Committee as well. And obviously John's on, on those committees and can, if you like, span the two elements.
I mean, if I may just come back in, is there benefit in formalising the position round about the assurance that the board receives round about health and safety in that very specific way? Are we meeting our responsibilities? Tick.
Yeah, I think we are, and all of the elements that we've talked about just now, we're meeting through the People Committee. So the very questions that we've just asked, we asked each committee meeting. And we have all of those metrics in front of us as well. I think it's only where there are specific issues. For example, when we looked at the safety improvement plans, I think the point that Anne has made is a very relevant one. Those have been focused on quite acutely, if you like, over the last couple of years with the health and safety improvement plans. And we do have our operational colleagues that come along to the meetings to speak to those specific topics as well. So I think my views at the moment is covered very well in the People Committee, but obviously we use that ability to talk through the Service Delivery Committee as well.
Yeah, and I'm going to let, I may have some views on that, but I'm going to let Bill come in.
Thanks, Kirsty and Brian. And Primrose, you've just prompted me to turn around in my mind what we're actually doing. And Primrose is quite right. In that committee, there is very good interrogation led by Anne and Primrose and colleagues of the officers before us in terms of trends in accidents and improvements and our training efforts and so on. What I'm turning over in my mind, Brian, is whether, and I can't remember because I haven't looked at the document instantly, but Primrose signs off each year, doesn't she, a report of the work of the committee that goes to the accountable officer. What I can't instantly remember is whether in that document we specifically say, and it might be for future committee chair Vary to think about, we have some kind of one-page annex at the back of it that says, at this meeting, we took particular assurance on this aspect of training and health and safety and so on, so that there's a record of when we interrogated particular subjects. And you'll forgive me, Primrose, can't remember exactly what you say, but the generality of that is no doubt in your annual report. But whether somebody could say, well, at this meeting, they looked at those things, and at that meeting, they looked, and then there's a spotlight review of X, Y, and Z, that might just be some supplementary, easily digestible document that says, here's evidence for the assurance that the rest of the board is seeking from this committee of how we've looked at this area of responsibility. I'll leave it there. Thank you.
I think that was a helpful input there, Primrose. I can see you want to come in too.
Yes, I think it is. It's helpful if we want to actually amplify that. It obviously comes out through the value added statement that we cover off what the committee has looked at over the year. And we certainly spotlight both on risks and on training and on health and safety.
I agree, and I think to a large extent it's the added value statement that could effectively refer to some of that. Let's have so we've recorded that there's some suggestions around how we might be able to support and enhance this. There is a new chair coming in, and we perhaps, if required, could have a further conversation at integrated governance, because there might well be implications not just for this committee but for other reports that are signed off by other committees. So let's mark that and we can come back to it. Lovely. If we're content that we received that report, John, it's still with you for the health and safety policy and policy statement.
Chair, thank you. Colleagues, this the health and safety policy and the support and management arrangements statement is actually just a refresh. It's to take account of the changes within the structures and the new directorate formation last year of training, safety and assurance, and it was to ensure that it was correctly aligned with the policy. It's only a change, and it's to make sure that you were aware of it, and that's it. Again, it's been through the governance process and was signed off at the recent People Committee. Again, Julie and I are happy to take any questions if there's anything.
Lovely. Any final questions or comments on that? Okay, lovely. Thank you. That's received. That takes us into our risk themes and whether there were new risks identified during this meeting that we need to attend to. I wasn't particularly aware of any increase in the level of risk or new risks as a result of our discussions, but I'll hesitate for a moment just in case other board members might have a different view. Are you thinking hard there, Fiona? Yeah, Fiona, on you go.
I'm trying to put my hand up. It just struck me that the conversation around the perfect storm, as Ian called it, in terms of supply and demand and the implications for delivery and costs, etc. I'm pretty sure, and in fact, I'm sure that these will be captured in individual projects, but it's a biggie. Martin's waving.
Yeah, let's bring Martin in for a view. That's a good point to raise, Fiona.
It's a good point. There's been a new risk added to the Strategic Risk Register FCS 012 that picks up this particular issue. And that's one of my 4 strategic risks for you as a board, will be our ability to spend our revenue and capital budget due to the increasing costs and the time delays associated with Brexit, COVID and the worldwide lockdown.
Lovely. Thank you. Content at that? Good, excellent, thank you. Board forward plan, Ali.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, looking at the forward plan and based on discussions today, as it stands, I don't think there's anything else to add unless anyone on the board has identified otherwise. Thank you.
Lovely, thank you. That's really helpful. So we've confirmed that our date of our next meeting is Thursday, the 26th of August. But of course, the one piece of remaining business that we have is that this is the last board meeting for 4 of our current board members, and it actually feels like an incredibly significant moment. As you'll be aware, we'd hoped that we might be able to be together today as the board in the as part of COVID recovery and being able to move back into face-to-face meetings and to be able to celebrate together and mark their departure. Unfortunately, that's not to be, but we will of course intend to do that once COVID restrictions allow. I do want to say a little bit about our departing board members, Primrose Stark and Anne Buchanan, each of whom have served 4 years and 8 months of service on the board, and also for Bill McQueen and Marika Dwarzis, who've each served 8 years and 9 months, which is quite remarkable, and reflects the set of circumstances we're in, that of course we can only serve 8 years, but they have been able to remain on to continue to support us over the last 9 months. If I say a little bit about them, and I know that Marika and Bill would also like to reflect a few moments, and if either other board member would like to, please indicate. I'm going to kick off with Primrose, really, and I think there was a marked step change on the board, both in terms of gender balance, but also in approach when Primrose joined the board. And I think her style and her ability to raise often quite tricky, complex issues in such a gentle, reflective way really marked a change in style and culture for the board that was incredibly welcome and has actually made a difference to not only the decisions being made, but the way that challenge is actually experienced by your executive colleagues, and that takes skill. That's without even beginning to speak about Primrose's ability as a chair to absolutely remain strategic and to focus and get the best out of individual board members. You've built great relationships with the exec team and with your board colleagues, and I've on a number of occasions have relied on your expertise and your judgment, as I know other board members and other executives have too. So I would really like to thank you for that contribution and to wish you all the best in your future endeavours. I'm confident this is not your last experience on a public sector board, and that in due course you will be stepping back into public service, I suspect, as chair, given your leadership skills. And I wish you the very best in that, and thank you from this board and from the service for your contribution. I'd like to also thank, yeah, absolutely. I'd also like to spend a minute thanking Anne Buchanan for her experience. And Anne, if you wipe your eyes, you will set me off. So behave as I'm speaking, because I'm feeling quite emotional talking about it, and the difference that you've made. You brought so much experience from other bits of the public sector, primarily the NHS, but not just, because you were able to draw on your other experience from the third sector that you've done in the last few years, as well as your own personal experience as a carer in more recent years. And we can see that reflected in some of your comments, that you're thinking not just about communities, you're thinking about staff, and you're thinking about your own broader experience. And it's that kind of compassionate, thoughtful, reflective stance that I've really appreciated. And the fact that it's often done in a very casual, offhand, humorous way, but with a serious point sitting underneath that. I know that we are losing you, but other bits of the public sector are gaining you. and that you've been poached effectively by the Board of NHS Tayside, where I've absolutely no doubt you will also be able to make a difference there. So thank you very much, Anne. We've also got Bill and Marika leaving, and I'm going to speak briefly about Marika before she goes. Marika and I were the two female board members when we joined the board, a board that had a rather different culture, I have to say, sitting around it in the early days. In fact, one of our first meetings, it felt like she and I had rather misjudged the culture, because we introduced ourselves and said, hello, we're Kirsty and Marika. And then other board members spent the next hour telling us about their extensive experience that they brought to the board, and we hadn't quite got that. However, we caught up fairly quickly and got the idea of what we were supposed to at least do in terms of presentation. But Marika's humble and direct approach, I was going to say conceals, but it doesn't conceal. It reveals her depth of experience and her ability to cut through flap and nonsense and words and irrelevance and come to the absolute nub of what is most important in the discussion, and to remind us of it so that we come back on task again. And that has been a repeating experience through the whole of your service on this board. Your tenacity also in identifying issues within organisations and sticking with them and focusing on them is pretty outstanding. And that was particularly relevant with Change Committee, TMPC, major projects, and the various names and iterations that that's had, which you've had leadership of for a good number of years, and been able to really shape, working alongside the exec, so that that now is in a very different place from the place that you took it over. And I know at times there have been both frustrations and joys in that, both for yourself and I'm sure for the exec colleagues. But without you, we would have been in a much more challenging place. So I would really like to thank you, particularly for those two aspects of your contribution. And then coming finally to Bill, and I actually almost don't know where to start with Bill. At the very beginning, Bill and I met at a social event for the SFRS and sat on a couch and spoke about children and people we knew in common and laughed and joked, and just began to kind of get an excitement for the organisation. And at that point, I had absolutely no idea who he was, because in my head, he was just Bill. I hadn't realised that he had probably advised just about every government for the last 25 years. And that has really, really shown your political astuteness, your depth of knowledge and understanding of systems, your ability to identify issues and to throw ideas into the pot in a way that people can take on or brush aside without any sense of ego around whether or not we should have to attend to them, has really made a huge difference. I personally owe you a huge debt of gratitude, having made the very wise decision of taking you in as the deputy chair, because you effectively fill lots of my gaps as well as bringing lots of your additional experience, and being able to know that I've got a confidential sounding board where I can pick the phone up to, bounce ideas off, get feedback from, and then do what I think is best without any sense of repercussion, has been incredibly useful to me. And I know that other senior execs have taken the opportunity to do exactly the same with you. So thank you very much. I understand that you will be spending a little bit more time on the golf course than with your family. I hope in some ways you can't resist the temptation of further service, while at the same time hoping that you can just take a well-reserved retirement and continue to spend your civil service pension wisely. So having said all of that, I'm going to briefly pause because I know that Marika and Bill would like to say a few words. Marika, would you like to kick off, or would you like Bill to go first? I don't mind which.
Oh. Well, I'll go first. At first I thought I'll let Bill go first, but then he'll be so eloquent and he'll say everything I want to say that I then end up not having very much to add anymore. I I don't want to say very much because I very much hope that we will still get together in a more sort of informal setting, and then all the funny anecdotes and everything can come out. But I think it is perhaps useful to sort of reflect on 8 years and 3/4 ago, when both when Kirsty, myself, and Bill all joined the board, and it was not only a very different board, it was also, for me personally, it was a very different me. I had never held a public appointment before, and to be frank, I was absolutely stunned on getting appointed at the time. I was Kirsty and I were the 2 youngest board members, and we were also the 2 female board members, and it felt like a huge hill to climb, to feel that I could contribute in a meaningful and useful way. And of the many things that I think I have to thank the fire service for, and my opportunity to be part of it for, is that it's given me the opportunity to learn, and to learn how to be a board member, and to learn about governance, and to learn also about myself and what I have to contribute. And I feel very privileged in having had that opportunity and being able now to do that elsewhere. But I also feel very privileged having been part of the fire and rescue service. It's been the most professionally run organisation that I've been part of. It's been an absolute pleasure to work with people and to get their support and their commitment to the work that they do. And it's been a pleasure also to work with the board colleagues. So I'm going to miss it hugely. It's been the organisation in my career that I've been the part of for longest, being the eternal job hopper. But 8 years and 9 months is well in excess of any time that I've been involved with any other organisation. So that in itself will leave a big gap in my life, actually, even though at the moment it's just on screen. So thank you very much, and thank you also for giving me all these grey hairs, which I'm actually now cherishing. So that's the other thing that's changed hugely in the past 8 years and 9 months. I don't look anything like I did nearly 9 years ago, but it's been an absolute pleasure, and I hope that we will get the opportunity to get together maybe in a couple of months' time to say a proper goodbye. So thank you very much.
Yes, absolutely. Primrose, I can see you've popped your hand up if you would like to say a few words.
Yes, please, Kirsty, if I may, not to steal any thunder, because I think Marika has said it all, and probably Bill will say it too. It's been a complete honour and privilege to be part of the service. The one thing I've said to a few people when I first joined the board was it actually feels like it becomes part of your DNA very quickly to be part of the service. But can I just also say a huge thank you to, it's an incredibly professional organisation to be part of, but can also say a huge thank you to the support team, because I do think as board members, we have a tremendous support in the background helping us to do the roles that we do, along with the SLT and our other board colleagues. So a huge thank you to everybody, and also to yourself, Kirsty, because it's down to the leadership of the board that we are all able to function as board members. And I think there has been a good team effort. We're able to challenge, we feel able to challenge, but it's in a very cooperative way. So thank you for that, and just thank you to everyone's support. It's been a real pleasure to be here over the last 4 years.
Thank you, Primrose. Bill.
Thanks, Kirsty, and thanks to you for the kind remarks, and to the service for the paperweight and the certificate that you gave us as mementos. Like Primrose and Marika, it's been a privilege and a pleasure to serve on the board, and it's been a rare and special experience to be in there from the start, as you and Marika have been. And I think it's fair to say that we've come in the 8 and a bit years a long way as a board, since Chief Officer Ali Hay and Assistant Chief Officer Dave Boyle were wondering what they would do with 12 new non-executive board members that they'd have to work with, and they thought that the best thing they could do would be to organise a bus tour of some fire stations in Scotland. So I think we've made progress. The years have flown by, but as my interim hairdresser, talking of hair, said to me, "It's been a long stint and your hair's got a lot grayer and a lot thinner since you started on the fire board, but I've sacked her and I'm now back to the regular barber." So reflecting again, you and I and Marika have actually seen off, well, we've seen come and go 2 chiefs, 4 deputies, maybe a dozen or so SLT members. I think it's 4 inspectors of the fire service and 3 or 4 ministers. I always forget the ministers, how many of those we've seen off. But seriously, it's been enormously satisfying to work with such a talented bunch of colleagues on the board and committed and talented staff at all levels in the organisation, and to be connected with such a can-do, positive organisation that is courteous. Remember those early meetings where we all shook hands round the table with everybody, took the first 20 minutes of a meeting to say hello? Well, that will be out the window post-COVID. And I think if you stand back and reflect that this is a national organisation been going 10 years in Scotland, and if you look at any other new organisation set up on that scale, or you compare the impact and presence of fire and rescue services elsewhere in the UK, and compare and contrast with the previous 8 services in Scotland, a realistic observer would say, well, this organisation, Scottish Fire and Rescue Service, has come a long way and is on many more stakeholders' radar and is having impact. And I think you would have to regard that as a very significant success. So I think we've achieved a lot. Like Primrose and Marika, I particularly want to thank the board support team, Debbie and Heather and Marion and Ali and his predecessors. Nice to see Roy Dunsire, but not forgetting Rab and Kenny Fraser, who've made my life easy. I won't embarrass myself too much by recounting the number of times when I've needed admin and IT assistance, and it has been provided without fuss instantly. And reflecting a bit further back, close working with Liz's team in HR in particular, Jerry and Rachel, George and Ramona have been very helpful to me in understanding the organisation. As colleagues were saying, I think the strength of this board comes from its diversity of style, its diversity of interests, experience, wisdom. I think we gel well as a team, which is to the credit of the chair and the chief officer. We are willing to challenge. I think my experiences compared to some other boards, members do their homework. They come prepared and ready to contribute to the debate. And just thinking, as I was last night, of a couple of examples where board members have really dug in and made an impact. You might think of the number of control centres we've got, the way we went about disposing for the best public purse advantage of the Lauriston building, the work that Marika and Fiona in particular have led in transformation and change, understanding business cases, benefits and so on of our transformation projects. The work the whole board did to get ourselves to a comfortable position with the pay offer to the trade unions, and the work that colleagues have led transforming or focusing on the need for leadership at all levels and succession planning. And I think those are notable things that board members, with the assistance of the chief and his team, have got their teeth into and made a difference. And finally, just in any role you undertake, it's ultimately the people you work with who make it memorable or satisfying or not. And I hope I think I've made friendships with board colleagues, with officers from the organisation that will continue into the future. And I think you're at a great and exciting point in the journey. And I'm going to look at you with interest for the next 5 years, because I want you to give me a footprint of fire stations and a duty system that is the best that you can do for taxpayers and communities in Scotland. And that requires a bit of change to be driven through. And the example you've given us today on UFAS that we'll come to in a minute is just a fabulous way of showing how you can prepare for the consultation and engagement that's needed there. So it's been terrific. I thank you all. and I look forward to observing you and wish you all the very best going forward. So thanks.
Lovely. And thank you. Oh, Nick. So with a final, oh, Anne, the last word should always really be for you, Anne, given your history.
I wasn't going to do a speech, so I won't. I just feel that I need to say something because everybody else has. Can I just say that it's been a privilege and a pleasure to be part of the family, and I'm going to miss you all hugely.
Wise words indeed. Thank you very much, Anne. And with a final thank you to all of you for your service, I'm going to close this meeting of the board